What is going on, everybody? Welcome to the Lineman Life podcast. I am your observant lineman, Uche Nwaneri. I appreciate everybody for being in on the podcast today. We got a number of cool things to go over, a number of important things to talk about. And I want to start this podcast by welcoming a very special guest to the show. Now, this guy has been a long time Madden football breakdown analyst in the YouTube hemisphere. And this guy has been the trusted voice in all things Madden as far as gameplay, as far as mechanics. And I'm a huge Madden fan. I'm a huge gamer, as most people probably know. So for me, this is an excellent guest to have on the show to go through and talk through some of these topics we're going to talk about today. I want to have all of you give a warm welcome to Ryan Moody from the Ryan Moody 21 channel. Ryan Moody, what is going on, brother?
Man, you oversold me on that a whole bunch. Like, I have a lot to live up to now.
Dude, you are the king of Madden breakdown. Dude, I don't even watch other channels when it comes to that. What's going on?
Not much. Before we get started, though, I have a challenge for you. I've watched a lot of your videos, and in the background, you have a game ball, and I'm assuming 2 of your game-worn helmets, correct?
Exactly. Yes, indeed.
Where was that game ball from? It better not against the Colts or the Ravens.
One of them is against the Colts. It's in the back, though. The one that you see in front, and this is over my right shoulder. Right, you know what? I hate doing this. Right there. That one right there is from our win against the Tennessee Titans. That was against Tennessee Titans. That was 2013. Yeah. 2013, we beat Tennessee at Tennessee's at LP Field. I think they changed the name of it now, but yeah, we beat those guys 29-27. The other one is actually from 2008. I think it was our second game of the season against the Colts in Indianapolis, and we beat them 24-21. I think it was 24-21. We actually had. That was my I'm sweating my ass off. We actually had that was my second game as a starter in the NFL. And we had our entire offensive line was decimated that year. So we went into Indy with there was a guy we had on our O-line. His name was Milton Brown. This guy, we signed him on Thursday. He started at right guard on Sunday. It was me at left guard, the backup center, and the backup right guard. So we only had our left tackle and our right tackle who were actually starters in that game. And we ran the ball we probably ran the ball like 40 times that game. Ended up rushing for, I think it was like 100 and maybe 180 something yards rushing. And we ended up beating the Colts at the very end of the game, barely beat them. They had Peyton. That was my first win as an NFL starter, and it was probably the hardest win that I had ever had as a player physically. Once the game was over, I sat in my locker after the game and kind of crumpled into the locker because I was literally I was done. I couldn't have played another down. So I got to learn what it took to actually win an NFL game that day.
Well, rushing against the Colts from 2004 to 2008 wasn't really anything to be proud of, though. Everyone was doing that.
Yeah, but we did it. We did it in a special kind of way in Jacksonville. We knocked out their teeth when we ran on the Colts when I was out there. And again, it's a division rival. Getting a win in Indianapolis is that's probably the hardest place to play in the division. So at the time, that was a huge win, especially with the injuries we had, with the low expectations coming off of those injuries for our offense. We pulled it out. Our defense was always solid that year. Our defense was one of the top that year, but just the fact that we didn't have we didn't have the stability on the O-line, and that we were able to go in there and pull out that win. That was huge. And so a big accomplishment. That ball is old and worn out back there, but I got him up there. I also have up top, actually the ball that's in the case, that's one of the footballs used in the game against the Colts. Fast forward now to 2000, what, 2000, I think it was 2012 or 2011 or 2012. I can't remember exactly which year, but that was the year that Maurice Jones-Drew won the rushing title. And that's one of the balls used in that game. He won the rushing title, and he broke the all-time Jaguars rushing record that Fred Taylor held. So I got one of those balls. Maurice Jones-Drew signed it, put the amount of yardage that he had for the season on it, and that's been sitting in that case for going on, what, like almost 7 or 8 years now?
Do you have a favorite of the two helmets as far as the design? I know when the gold faded helmet came out, a lot of people really didn't like it. It's grown on me since, but do you care about either helmet design more than the other?
Nah, not really. I thought they both looked good. I mean, I thought particularly the really dark teal with the sparkles, with the kind of flakes in it. I thought that was a really dope helmet. If we had the new logo on that to me would have been perfect. But I also think the two-tone helmets were dope too. For the uniforms we had, those uniforms were set up to be like new, bleeding edge style uniforms. Like that was, kind of that was a design Nike made with the intent of kind of what would the Jaguars look like 20 years from now? What kind of a futuristic style would jerseys take in the NFL? And I love those uniforms. Honestly, I thought those uniforms were, some of the best in the NFL. People did have a problem with the two-tone helmet, I guess, but I mean, at the end of the day, I think it should have just been flipped. I think the gold should have been in front and the black should have been in back. I think that's how it should have been. But
well, a lot of people, those uniforms, you guys went through some years there where there was a lot of uniform designs. And as a collector, I own a good bit of those uniform designs. I actually loved some of those Jaguar uniforms, especially that in your other side there, you have the teal uniform in the picture with the lines that went down the side. That was really nice. And then they progressed when Nike came in to the more aggressive look, I guess you could say. But I always loved the Jaguars colors. A lot of people, you mentioned that first helmet, a lot of people viewed that as a black colored helmet, but actually if you have it and you look at it, it's a super dark almost like a metallic teal. Like you said, it's got tons of metal flake in it. They're beautiful uniforms. It was great watching those uniforms get beat by the Colts for a very long time.
Look, I loved the uniforms, honestly, that we had in Jacksonville. When I got there, when I was in college, one of the dopest things to me about looking forward to the NFL was the jerseys that they had, the way that they were made, and being in Indianapolis or being in Indiana. I would see the Colts and the Jaguars play all the time. And when, and the Jaguars had those all black uniforms, I would see them play in those on Monday nights, on Sunday nights. And, I was like, those are the cleanest uniforms in the NFL. I ended up getting drafted there. And, and this is, a short story. I ended up getting drafted there. And my rookie year, our first Monday night game was against the Colts. And Jack said that we were going to wear the all blacks for that game. So I'm hyped. I'm like, yes. I mean, I'm a rookie. I'm on kickoff return, but, I'm going to get to wear those all black uniforms. Well, guess who was inactive for that game? Me. Inactive on the sideline while everybody else gets to wear the black uniforms. I'm just wearing sweats. And, that kind of put a real damper on my night because I was looking forward to being active that game, but I wasn't active. So didn't get to wear them. And then, promptly the next season we changed our uniforms, which, but we did get all black versions of those uniforms you see behind me in the picture, which I really like those uniforms. I think those were the overall for me before, of all of the older jerseys. I think those were the best ones.
The only ones I didn't like from that redesign they did, the all black ones were great from that year as well. I think they had teal sleeves on them. Was the all gold ones? Remember? I think that might have been the color rush.
The color rush. Yeah, I was out of Jacksonville when they got those color rushes, but we actually wore the teal with the white. I think it was the teal with the black pants that was before the color rush. So the next year after I left Jacksonville was when they started the whole color rush thing in the NFL. But I thought that those color rushes were okay. They were okay. Look, once you get sweaty, they look more like urine than anything else. But they're fine. They're fine. I didn't have a problem with them. So let's get started on some of these topics here that I wanted to talk about. And for me, I wanted to first get into what is kind of turned into a bit of a hot topic in the NFL. And I'm going to share the screen here just to kind of give people a little context so they can see what we're talking about here. The Rooney Rule. The Rooney Rule in the NFL, for those of you who don't know, the Rooney Rule is a rule that was put in place in 2003 that says that you cannot hire a new head coach. You can't hire or you can't make a hire for a head coach vacancy without having, interviewed a minority coach before finalizing that hiring process. And let's take a look here at this Newsweek article. And I'm just going to go through it very briefly with you guys so we can kind of give a little bit more context to this issue. It says a familiar issue reared its head during the annual coaching carousel that has taken center stage in the NFL over the last few weeks. The so-called Rooney Rule has again been thrust into the spotlight due to the lack of minority candidates interviewed for the head coach role by teams needing to fill vacancies. Established in 2003, the rule mandates franchises must interview at least one minority candidate for their head coach vacancy. It did not take long for the Rooney Rule to make its impact felt. Following the implementation, the percentage of head coaches from a minority background rose as high as 22% compared to 6% before the rule was introduced. The effect, however, has vanished almost as swiftly. Of the 31 NFL teams currently with a head coach, Cleveland Browns are yet to replace Freddie Kitchens. Only 4 have a minority head coach: the Pittsburgh Steelers, Miami Dolphins, Los Angeles Chargers, and Washington Redskins. The latter hired Ron Rivera less than a month after he was fired by the Carolina Panthers, making him the only minority coach hired in the current coaching carousel. Dallas Cowboys appointed former Green Bay Packers head coach Mike McCarthy, while the Panthers hired former Baylor coach Matt Rule, and the New York Giants replaced Pat Shurmur with New England Patriots special teams and wide receivers coach Joe Judge. Rivera, and I think we'll hold it there. Ryan, what do you think about the Rooney Rule? Let me get your perspective on that first. I think it's important to kind of understand how people maybe perceive it. What do you think about it?
Well, the Colts always had, at least from a meaningful period of time, an African-American coach. Think back to Tony Dungy, Jim Caldwell that took over. Obviously, the Super Bowl the Colts played in featured the first time 2 African-American coaches. And I thought at the time, that was setting a standard and expectation that, if there was any prejudice, that it needed to be removed just because of success. I think the problem that I have with the rule is it's teams just going through the motions. When you look at what just happened with the Cowboys, is Marvin Lewis really in a distinct competition from a success standpoint to Mike McCarthy? I don't believe so. So do they really bring him in to see if he is a viable coach, or did they bring him in because they have to appease a rule? That's what I don't like. The other side of this is, and kind of what's been left out from this conversation is, we're now in a time where there's a lot of female coaches, assistant coaches, trainers. When are they going to get, if you're going to basically go to a team and say, hey, listen, you have to interview a minority coach, when are they going to go to them then and say, hey, you have to interview a female as well? I know it seems a bit outlandish, but you can't, you have to be equal across the board. And obviously, you've got a well-diverse coaching staff now in the NFL. I just, like I said, I hate to see teams that just, when we can look at it as fans and know they're doing it just to do it, that defeats the purpose of it.
Yeah. I think that you make a lot of good points there. And for the most part, I agree with everything that you just said. To me, I think it's just a sham of a rule. And I kind of feel the same way about even, such policies as affirmative action. I feel like when you look at the landscape of the coaching world in sports, at the end of the day, it always balances itself out that whoever provides the best opportunity to win, whoever gets the best results in there and has the biggest and has the most, established credentials when you're comparing coaches from a winning standpoint, from a championship standpoint, Those things should always take precedent over, in my opinion, whether or not the person should be allowed to have it as a token gift for, the color of their skin. At the end of the day, I would rather that the NFL not interview a single black head coach than to parade Marvin Lewis around as if he is some kind of, look, here, we did what we're supposed to do. Nobody, like you said, nobody had any doubt in their mind that Jerry Jones had already made up his mind as to who he was going to make the new head coach in the NFL. And for the simple fact that they brought in Marvin Lewis just to satisfy a rule that the NFL put in place to try and bolster minority coaches into the league at the head coaching position, it's a mockery of the professionalism that a guy like Marvin Lewis represents. This is a guy who has a proven record as a winner in the NFL. He may not have been able to get his team over the hump in the playoffs. Yes, he's 0-7 as a head coach in the playoffs. But this is a guy who has been able to take a franchise like the Bengals and make it a consistent playoff contender. Look, I went to the playoffs one time in Jacksonville. One time. The Jacksonville Jaguars in the past 15 years have been to the playoffs twice. So I'm sure at the time we'd give our left leg to have a guy like Marvin Lewis come in and get us into the playoffs every year just to lose in the first round, because there's a big difference between getting in the playoffs and losing in the first round and not getting to the playoffs at all. And at the end of the day, when you look at what, and I don't blame Jerry Jones. I don't blame him at all. I don't say, oh, Jerry Jones, he just brought in Marvin Lewis to make him look like a fool. No, he was satisfying the rule that has been put in place by the NFL. It's the NFL. It's the league's fault that this rule has now turned into a joke. It's a mockery because when you look at these owners, when you look at the people who make these decisions, they do their due diligence. So if they already have somebody who they see as the lead candidate, let them hire the guy. Let them hire the guy and bring him in. Don't make Jerry Jones bring in a black coach or a minority coach, or, let's say even, to take it a step further, like you said, a female coach. Don't bring them in to parade them around as pacifying the rule, because that's just a mockery. And to do that to these people who have done so much for the sport in terms of representation on that minority end, I think it's a sad state, and I feel like the Rooney Rule needs to go. I feel like at the end of the day, the best coach for the job should get the job and shouldn't have to wait for the sideshow of a thing like the Rooney Rule to be satisfied before that happens.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I mean, essentially what you've done is you've taken Marvin Lewis, who by all accounts has given his entire life to football. Okay, there's no shame in that. This has been his livelihood, and made him an obligation more than anything else. Now you're obligated to that. And like you said, from afar, we can look at this and criticize how it's perceived, but how does it appear to him to be perceived? Does he feel like, well, this is the only reason I'm being brought in, and I'm going to have an uphill battle if I'm going to beat out Mike McCarthy for this job? Because I think we've really yet to see a scenario where we've had a minority coach or a female coach, or however you want to present this, brought in, where we've said, okay, from a fan's perspective, we all felt Mike McCarthy was a better candidate to coach the Cowboys. Now, had Marvin Lewis gotten the job, we would have been surprised, but we could have went back and said, well, he might not have had that opportunity if the Rooney Rule didn't exist to bring him into that equation, where now he had that chance to sell himself to the team and explain what he has to offer. Without that moment, as you said, it really diminishes the value of the actual rule. At the end of the day, and I think the Cowboys might be one of the best examples in all sport of this, it is the team owner's opinion of what he wants done with his team. You should not be able to go to him and tell him the process he must fulfill. If he wants to coach the team himself, which God knows he probably does, then he should have that opportunity. But it is ironic to me that a lot of people use the Cowboys kind of as, flying that flag of this is what would happen with a poor ownership. But, to be fair, I've always looked at Jerry Jones as, how a fan would run a team. I mean, he really is the biggest fan.
Cowboys' biggest fan.
He just owns them. He gets to make all those decisions, and for better or worse, I would say if any of us as a fan owned a team, I would probably be making the same irrational snap, spur of the moment, poor decisions because you're just always trying to do what you feel is right. Whether this works out with Mike McCarthy, we don't know, but it certainly does make you feel bad for Marvin Lewis, who is a well beyond qualified candidate, who no doubt should maybe not be a head coach at this point, as you said, given the playoff record and how the NFL is so dependent on success, but certainly should have a position somewhere, maybe outside the NFL as a head coach and maybe the XFL or another league, or I think would certainly fit very well into a coordinator standpoint, really with most any NFL team.
Yeah, and I agree with you on that. And again, like I said, I don't put this on the Cowboys because at the end of the day, they pacified the rule. But I do feel like the rule shouldn't exist. I feel like in an ultra competitive sport like the NFL, it always boils down to who is the best coach for the job. If Marvin Lewis was going to be hired as the Cowboys' new head coach, we would have known that. That would have been something that would have been evident from the start. We all knew as soon as it was reported that Mike McCarthy was in Dallas, that Mike McCarthy was meeting with Jerry Jones, and that he was still in Dallas the day after his interview. We knew that was the guy that he was going for. Now, did he bring in Marvin Lewis before he brought in Mike McCarthy, or he brought him in after he brought in Mike McCarthy? Do you know about that?
The news kind of all hit at once. The leak was
I felt like it all came at one time. Yeah. And now I will say is that it seemed pretty pathetic that Dallas said the reason they didn't bring in Marvin Lewis was because he was stipulating that Hugh Jackson had to be part of the package deal to get him to sign. I think that was a bit of a gaffe for the Cowboys to even use that as an excuse. We knew you didn't want Marvin Lewis when we saw that Mike McCarthy was still in Dallas, that he slept over at Jimmy Jones's house. Jerry Jones, I'm sorry. Jerry Jones's house. We knew who they wanted, which is fine. I have no problem with that. Mike McCarthy was his man, and Mike McCarthy was his man. Don't bring in Marvin Lewis just to pacify the rule. The rule shouldn't exist specifically because of this. That's an embarrassment to Marvin Lewis. He had to pick up from what he was doing, fly down to Dallas, sit in an office and talk to somebody who he knew didn't even want to hire him, had no intention of hiring him. Hell, they probably didn't even talk about him getting hired. They might have sat there and just had some coffee and chatted it up and shot the shit. Who knows? But at the end of the day, we all knew, and Jerry Jones obviously knew that wasn't the hire he was going to make. And I'm sure it felt just as cringeworthy to Jerry Jones that he had to bring this guy in, sit him down, knowing damn well he was not going that route. And that's where the failings of this rule come into play. And that's why it's a rule that needs to be abolished in the NFL. Let the competition play out and let the credentials of the coaches speak for themselves. I think that this league has progressed to a point, at least I hope this league has progressed to a point by now that we realize that the value of minority players and coaches cannot be understated or cannot be overstated. There is the vast majority, I think 70% of the players in the NFL are black or minorities. I think that there is a good portion of position coaches that are minorities. And as we've seen, black coaches, minority head coaches, they can get their teams to the Super Bowl. We've seen that. We've seen that from Tony Dungy. We've seen that from Lovie Smith. We've seen that from Ron Rivera. We've seen that from a number of coaches, and we've seen a number of black coaches also at the same time fail miserably. Prime example is the Hugh Jackson situation in Cleveland. But that plays on both sides. We've watched Freddie Kitchens come in as the Cleveland Browns head coach and do no better than the coach before him. So it's not, I don't think that it boils down to at this point in the league, I don't think it boils down to the color of the skin of the coach. I think it boils down to, what results have you shown that you can produce in the past, and what, can you bring to the team in the future? And at the end of the day, if there is a way to balance it out, ultimately, if we feel like our coaches or minority coaches aren't getting enough good looks, then there's a way to balance that out as well. And that's the players. The players have the power to dictate these things if they are willing to take that risk and step outside of that lane that they're in as players and push for that. And we know that that can happen because you see it happen in every sport where players have say or have influence over the coaching staff that they have to that they're going to have. Look at LeBron James, perfect example. This is a guy who pretty much gets to choose his head coach with every team that he goes to, you know. And you look at what happens with a guy like him, for better or for worse, he has an effect on that franchise and on their decision making. So there is always a way to balance out the scales if you're willing to take that step. But instituting a rule like the Rooney Rule has, you know, with the intentions it had, okay, understandable, but the effect and the kind of, I would guess, it has kind of played itself out to a certain extent. It's just not a useful rule at this point. I think the NFL needs to get rid of it.
There's a natural progression here too, though. I mean, if you go back and look, it's so good that you mentioned, 70% of the players in the NFL right now are black. Those black players, exceed at a high level. They become coaches. Look no further than Eric Bieniemy, Joey Porter. Yep. Sure, they start out as coordinators based on their on-field play, and then naturally you're going to have that player that becomes a coach that's black. It's just going to have to take time. We've seen it with Frank Wright. We've seen it with a lot of different white coaches that have parlayed that playing. Tony Dungy did as well, for that matter. He was a cornerback for the Steelers. So I just think it's going to take time to build that, kind of lineage and the player to coach, or I guess player to coordinator to coach kind of tree. But once it starts to happen naturally, it's probably going to dominate the league to a very high degree. I mean, if you continue to see those coordinators have success, you continue to see how a player can impact a younger player in probably a more positive way, I would think, having been there and played the game, than someone who hasn't could. I think you're going to see this naturally become a lot more effective in the NFL, and you don't need a rule in place to kind of usher it along. And instead, like you said, we get a scenario like we just had where I can't help but imagine Jerry Jones and Mike McCarthy having a Step Brothers-esque weekend together with this sleepover they had, and then Jerry Jones has to drive into work to sit there and talk to Marvin Lewis for 15 minutes to tell him, hey, I'm not going to hire you. It's in that context, it's very preposterous.
Yeah. Like I said, I think that is it's just something that it's an inconvenience for everyone involved. And, again, it's a mockery of the process itself. And in an ultra competitive sport like football, especially at the NFL level, you don't need that rule, because at the end of the day, these owners want to win. These owners want to be able to have the best chance at a Super Bowl, and you want to have the best coach in there to do it. You want to have a coach that's compatible with your team, compatible with the style of or with the roster that you have at hand, and can make adjustments to that roster if need be. And I think we're kind of past those days of, they just pick, it's just white guys that are just getting picked to be head coaches. Look at what the coach in Miami is doing right now. For every stretch of the imagination, the Miami Dolphins we assumed were trying to tank the season, but this guy actually kind of turned the culture around there over the course of the season, finished out the year strong, and now they're actually in a position to build instead of just blowing up what they have. They did trade away some players, they did get rid of some marquee players that they had, but still at the same time, that franchise is in a lot better shape than one would have thought based on the first quarter of the season and how they performed. And that's a franchise that has a black head coach, so it can be done. It's about the strategic will of a coach. It's about the setting up of the staff and drafting the right players and building the right culture. If you can do those things, then you can be successful. And it doesn't matter if it's a black coach or a white coach. At the end of the day, sometimes it'll be unbalanced to one side or the other, sure, but there's always a way to find a space for minority coaches in the league, because they have proven that they have the ability to be successful, and that's what it boils down to. So
Yeah, Brian Flores didn't follow that same, trait that we just talked about, but he was an assistant coach for the Patriots. He then,
yeah,
transferred that over to the Dolphins. Now he did have a playing career as a college player. He
yeah,
just never made the NFL level. If he had, then like you said, I mean that's kind of what we're talking about, them being able to kind of pinpoint and say, hey, listen, here's the tipping point of seeing how well this can be handled. And as you said, he had a turnaround for the Dolphins organization this year that I would say fans probably questioned until they beat the Patriots, forced them into a wild card situation and get them out of the playoffs. But a lot of people literally sat there and was like, man, why turn around so late when conventional wisdom was tank the season, get your number one pick and go on with your day? But, good coaching is good coaching. And I hate to say this, as much as a Colts fan in me says, the Patriots organization taught him a whole lot about making good players, making players play to their ability, and winning games. And unfortunately, I think we've seen the past couple weeks here with the Patriots. Former Patriots coaches have a way of beating their old team, and hopefully that continues for a very long time.
Yeah, for sure. And Vrabel was a player, not a coach, but at the same time, it's coming out of that culture, that New England culture, that New England way. They go back, they become coaches, and now they find ways to beat to surpass the master. So the student becomes the master in that case. And again, let's not have too much of an overreaction to what happened, but let's also call it for what it is. It's just a rule that doesn't really it doesn't translate into this more modern era of football. I mean, 2003 and 2020. There has been a big change in how the business of the NFL is done, is handled, and the way that the culture of the NFL even is handled now at this point is far different than it was back then. So I think it's a rule that's kind of overstayed its welcome. It's outdated at this point, and we can move past it. I got a super chat here that I want to take a look at from Sneaker Pikachu. He says the Rooney Rule ended up being lip service. The Rooney Rule just ended up being lip service, which just speaks to kind of what we've been talking about here. It's outdated. I mean, I understand the intention of it, what they wanted to do with it, but now at this point, I think we can move past it. And I think that'll be for the betterment of the league, and for the betterment of these coaches who are being kind of strung along and put in positions that are awkward, to say the least.
I guess to put closure on that, if you look back at the history of the NFL, you cannot really write the history of the league currently without recognizing players, as you mentioned, like Tony Dungy, Lovie Smith, but you certainly could write the history of the NFL without any mention of the Rooney Rule, and I don't think you impact the history of the game.
Yeah, I don't think it has I don't think it has had an impact necessarily, and I don't think that it's necessary to actually, like you said, to alter the history of the NFL or alter the future of the NFL moving forward. So definitely a topic that we'll keep an eye on as we move forward. But I also want to talk about, speaking of the Patriots, I also want to talk about what is their next move. The Patriots now are looking at a post-Tom Brady world, and Bill Belichick is going to have some decisions to make in this coming offseason. What offseason has already started for them. But it's a world where they're going to have to find that next quarterback to put in for what we can all assume now has been is the departure of Tom Brady from New England. I actually read somewhere Peter King has said that there is interest in Dalton from Cincinnati as someone that Bill Belichick, Andy Dalton is someone that Bill Belichick is interested in bringing into New England to make their new quarterback for the franchise. What do you think about that?
Well, at this point, I think it's hard to begin a discussion where you talk about upgrading from Tom Brady, right?
Yeah.
I think I think you look at the Patriots organization as a whole, and the first thing you have to consider is, where does Bill Belichick fit into all this? Does he want to rebuild a team? Is that something that he has an interest in at his age, or has he essentially, cashed in the chips to a degree and willing to leave with, what he has? To me, I think the first thing, if I was in charge of the Patriots, I would do would probably be to look into getting a tight end. You really don't have anybody there. And don't get me wrong, you're not going to replace Gronkowski, but, maybe you look at Hunter Henry, to bring somebody in along those lines. You have to go get a receiver, whether you're going to draft that, you're going to look at maybe Robbie Anderson coming out of free agency. You have to get someone there to, whether it's Tom Brady or not, have a safety valve, have a deep threat. If they don't do that, I think that's going to be a continued problem. The other kind of embarrassment of riches the Patriots have had for years now have been, they've used their second string quarterback as a feeder system to the NFL. Whether you look at Jacoby Brissett, Jimmy Garoppolo, go back to, I believe, Matt Castle, you've got tons of backup quarterbacks that have made it out of New England and done very, very well. The problem is now you have a situation where, and I think it's unique that fans in New England aren't clamoring for this. They don't want Tom Brady out. I mean, we just watched the championship game, or the wild card game. You get so used to saying the Patriots in a championship game, a wild card game seems to make no sense. Where they had the guy had his bed sheet, please stay, Tom. They don't want to see him go. I think the Patriots in a very unique position where, basically, for better or worse, Tom Brady and Bill Belichick leave on their own terms. And if that means they tank the next 3 seasons, they're probably still not going to be pushed out the door by Kraft. It's just the way it is. But we've seen they have to, especially the last game, set aside the defense just getting ran through by Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry's a special player and deserves that recognition for what he did. That wasn't a bad defense as much as it was Derrick Henry's an elite player. So I think you have to look at what they couldn't do on offense, where those struggles came from. And a big part of that starts with, Tom Brady was throwing the ball to guys that, unless you're a hardcore fan, you don't know. And very few of them were even on the team at the beginning of the season. They tried to stop the bleeding with Mohamed Sanu. And I'm a big fan of Mohamed Sanu. I've liked him since he was a Bengal, as a matter of fact, since you brought up Andy Dalton. But his versatility is something I feel like they really didn't take advantage of. Here's a guy that used to be a quarterback, and really could have fed into some of those trick plays, and you just don't see the Patriots do that. Is that because they don't have the protection up front that they used to have? Is that because they don't have the personnel around the quarterback that they had at one time? Where, you're talking about some of the all-time greats when you talk about Gronkowski, Randy Moss. Without those players that, granted, you're not always going to have available to you, you still have to build a base of decent guys, and they struggled this year building that base of above average players, and it showed in the playoffs more than anything else.
Yeah, I think you make a lot of good points, and I think one thing that they didn't necessarily account for was how much they were going to miss Gronk. I think that tight end position, if you look at the time that Tom Brady has been in New England, that tight end position has been his safety blanket, his safety net. It has been his go-to in any tough situation, any tight circumstances within the course of a game. That tight end position has been the premier role on that offense. Even to this, I would say it's been as important as Tom Brady himself. And just look at the investments that they've made in the tight end position during the course of their Super Bowl runs. Gronkowski, Aaron Hernandez, for everything that we know about him now, he was next in line to be the premier option on that offense once Gronkowski. Do they even stay with Gronkowski as long as they did? If Aaron Hernandez doesn't have the entire murderer situation going on, where would he have played out in that system? I think that we all found out a ton about the New England Patriots offense and the system that they run once they lost Gronkowski. And maybe they were in denial about his importance to the offense and his importance to Tom Brady himself. But I think it can't be overstated how utterly essential and paramount their tight end position is to the offense being successful, because it never really mattered who they had at wide receiver. Yes, they had Randy Moss. Yes, they had what was his name? he went to Denver, the slot wideout that they had before Amendola.
Emmanuel Sanders?
Not Emmanuel Sanders. Anyways, he plays that. I think it was Amendola. I forget. Whatever. Anyways,
Wes Welker.
Wes Welker. There you go. Wes Welker. Yes, they had guys like Wes Welker, guys who could, give those, who could run those quick slants, quick outs, change of pace, double move routes that Brady could get the ball off to quickly in any short to intermediate situation. But when you look at how that offense operated and was able to create so many problems for defenses, it was because at the end of the day, you didn't have anybody who could guard the tight end. The tight end could go up against a safety, a corner, a linebacker, and he would 9 times out of 10 win that matchup. And that was what drove defenses crazy. And when they lost that option, when they lost that threat, the offense suffered greatly. Doesn't matter. It wouldn't have mattered if they had Randy Moss. You can bracket a receiver during the course of a game and take them out of the game if your secondary plays it well enough. But a tight end being a versatile position that can stretch the field and with the size to overmatch any position on the defense, it changes the game for the offense. And I think that at the end of the day, the Patriots that is where the chink in their armor began, or that's where it starts. So that's what it starts with, is that position. Not having somebody who was a game changer at that position was really the first sign of doom for that offense this season.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I mean, and not only that, we were accustomed to the Patriots bringing in players, and I think Patrick Chung is a great example, a guy that they basically let go to the Eagles, comes back, plays well. You were seeing that situation kind of stop. You saw it stop this year. Philip Dorsett, Antonio Brown, they really struggled to bring in guys and have viable responses from them that we were so used to seeing, guys come in. Jabal Sheard was a great one, went from the Browns, had great season with the Patriots, then goes on to the Colts. They really didn't have the ability. I guess the only way to put it is, the Patriot way. They just weren't putting the Patriot way into players. Now, whether it's because they didn't have the talent, whether it's because the message wasn't received, or like you said, I think maybe it was the fact that you had a locker room, at least this year, that wasn't full of all the success. You didn't have, Gronkowski and I mean, Brady is obviously there, but you don't have all these guys with all these Super Bowl rings saying, hey, this is the way this is going to end up. Right, you only had Tom Brady, which everybody knows is the greatest of all time. But to be fair,
when he's not the most relatable guy in that locker room.
Exactly. To be fair, a lot of those guys aren't looking at Tom Brady and saying, yeah, I can do that too. I'm going to be considered one of the all-time greats in the game, period. It's really hard as a player to look at somebody like that and personally relate yourself to it and say, yeah, if Tom Brady can do it, I can do better. You probably can't.
Yeah. No, you're 100% right. I mean, you look at and that's a huge thing in the locker room is being able to find those leaders who inspire you because you can relate to the messages that they're trying to put forward. And I think that, and this is not Tom Brady's fault, but I think that when a guy like Tom Brady says something in the locker room, for a lot of guys, that's more pressure than it is inspiration. That's more of, oh my God, this guy is the greatest quarterback, potentially the greatest player to ever play the game, at least in this era. And, him sitting here telling us to pull it together, that's pressure. When you have a guy like Gronk, when you have a guy like what's his name? I suck with the names as far as the Patriots go, but just using Gronk as an example, this is a guy who is a much more relatable player. He's probably a guy who can get along with more players in the locker room than Tom Brady can, to be honest, because he's a workman. He's a blue collar, go out there, bust his butt, fight through injuries, play through pain, but celebrate and enjoy and relish the victories and the successes with his players in the locker room. Edelman, even. These are guys who you can look at and say, hey, that guy's a workhorse. That guy is out there doing his thing. He's over here giving us props, inspiring us to be, to play at the highest level we can. Those are the guys who are usually the glue of the team, the glue that keeps everything together. And when you lose those voices, Tom Brady's voice alone is just not going to do it because he's on such a high pedestal. He is so far above the level that the other players in that locker room are on, just simply because of his success. And that's no fault of his own. That's just the way it is. It's hard to look at a guy like Tom Brady. It's hard to look at a guy like Peyton Manning and hear these guys, try to inspire you, but they're speaking from the clouds. And that's a hard thing to really connect with. Whereas a guy like Gronk, he's right there on earth. He's right there on the ground level with you, in the trenches with the linemen blocking, running routes, taking hits, getting injured, coming back. Those are things that are more that you could attribute more to galvanizing a locker room and keeping guys together. And, it really does. Like I said, they didn't know. Maybe the Patriots just didn't know what they were losing when Gronk retired and didn't see it as something that would alter the Patriot way. But it is, in a sense, he embodied the Patriot way more than any other player in that locker room. And other players like him embodied that nature as well. That's why you would see guys come in from other teams and adapt to that Patriot way as well. Another guy who was in that locker room, Rob Ninkovich, a teammate of mine from Purdue University. That was a guy, another player who quietly embodied the Patriot way. And when you have a collective group of guys like that, and it's usually just a handful, they really hold everything together for that 53-man roster. And when you lose those things, it's apparent. And I think that's what we're seeing with them now. Now, I think if you bring in a guy like Andy Dalton, I think if you bring in a couple of free agent acquisitions to kind of bolster that offense, and you focus on, again, getting the positions like tight end sewn up and having good talent there to kind of try and fill that void that a player like Gronk left, I think that will help them kind of find themselves again without having to blow up the entire offense.
My only fear with that is, if you think about it, first of all, from the outside looking in, when do we really have quarterbacks, any quarterback, Eli Manning, Peyton Manning, Joe Flacco, I don't care who, go out and really show from the sideline the ability to coach up other players? What are you going to do? Block stronger, run your route cleaner. It's not the same as, maybe you go into a defense and you're playing alongside, a Brian Urlacher or a Ray Lewis, an all-time great there, where, hey, listen, go out, you play. I'm here back behind you to back you up. And, maybe you do have that incentive to hit somebody a little bit harder. Maybe you do have a little bit incentive to get off that block a little bit cleaner. I just think from an offensive standpoint, it's a little bit different.
Well, I think that you find it more in guys like, guys who are bigger threats or from like, look at a guy like Russell Wilson. That guy's a perfect example of a guy who can inspire the entire team because he drops back, he throws that ball, but he also will take off and take shots and, and put his shoulders down and try to and dive for that first down marker. Guys like Aaron Rodgers who do the same thing, who put their bodies on the line for the betterment of the team in moments that are, the biggest moments that they need to get that type of thing done. Now, you don't necessarily have that with Tom Brady because Tom Brady's not outrunning nobody. Tom Brady if he's not in the pocket, then he's going to be on his back. But, when you look at these guys who go out, it's all about, and as an offensive lineman, I can attest to this because we had David Garrard. And one of the things that we loved about Dave was that this guy would get out of the pockets, because sometimes protection's just going to break down, bro. We can't block everybody, to perfection every play. Sometimes protection is going to break down. As a quarterback, have our back. Get your ass out the pocket and start running. Get some yards. Make something happen with your feet. And a quarterback that does that puts his body out there. I'll never forget when we were in Pittsburgh my rookie year in the playoffs, 4th and 1 or 4th and 3. I can't remember what it was. We dropped back. We ran a design QB draw, and Dave takes it for 40, 50 yards to basically seal the game against the Steelers in the playoffs. That kind of grit, that kind of determination to break a tackle and get down the field, that's what that's what earned our respect as linemen, because we see a quarterback who can go out there and make plays, not only with his arm, but with his legs, who can take hits, who can take shots, get up, look us in the eyes and say, you know what, forget that. It's the next play. Let's do it. You don't necessarily have that with Tom Brady. And I think that's where some of those intangibles, as great as he is, that's an intangible that he doesn't necessarily have. And, what happens when Tom Brady gets sacked a couple times? He's going to start screaming at his linemen. What happens when his receivers run wrong routes? You're going to see him explode. You can see it in his eyes. And I think that for everything that is great about Tom Brady, that is part of his persona as a competitor that, to some degrees, turns off players who look at that. That would turn me off. I'd be like, you know what? F off, dude. Maybe that blitz coming on this next series. Maybe if they bring that same blitz, I might just turn my head. No, never done that before. Never let my quarterback get hit. But that can, in a way, that can be a turnoff to the pulse of the team, where guys don't necessarily look at you as the guy to inspire. Yes, we know you're going to be great. We know if it's a situation where we got to come back. There's nobody who's betting against Tom, but he doesn't necessarily inspire his teammates in the same respect as somebody like a Russell Wilson.
In that same light, though, if you're a Patriot player right now and you're sitting there in the locker room and Tom Brady's job is on the line, right? Andy Dalton is going to come in to compete against Tom Brady. How do you feel? You have to feel at that point, okay, no one here is safe, and maybe either start to look for ways out or other options. To me, that seems like a really delicate way to handle player relations that could go the wrong way.
Well, if we're talking, and you're talking about an Andy Dalton coming in to compete with a guy like Tom Brady or Peyton Manning,
that sounds comical, by the way. It doesn't even, you don't even want to say it.
I'm
Andy Dalton competing with Tom Brady,
because Tom Brady's a free agent. You know what I mean? He's done as far as officially being bound to a contract. That's the difference there. That's the only way that you bring in an Andy Dalton with a look towards the future. There's no way that if Tom Brady still had a year left on his contract, it doesn't even, there's no considering an Andy Dalton as someone who you can even talk about being in competition. But again, we look at what Bill Belichick has done with those backup quarterbacks that he's had in New England, and look at the success that they've gone on. And I'll call it about a 50-50 in terms of rate of success, but they've had success at other teams. Look at Jimmy G. Right now, Jimmy G is on the cusp of taking that step to being a next level quarterback. If he's able to push this San Francisco team to the Super Bowl, then I think he will officially have taken that step. But there's something to be said about what Bill Belichick has been able to do with players that he brings in at the quarterback position, and how he can or how he's been able to mold them into quality players. And like most people, and I think the rumor was that Bill Belichick wanted to make the break with Tom Brady a few years ago, and Kraft was against that, vehemently against it, and that was what was the catalyst to the shipping off of Jimmy G from New England to San Fran. Now we look at that now in hindsight, and that very well may have been a critical error in judgment, because we may have been talking about the succession of Tom Brady by Jimmy G in New England, which, oh my God, can you imagine if that would have happened? And now we're maybe looking at the next 10 years of New England dominance being extended to 2 decades. Sheesh, I hate them all. I would have hated them all, even more so by then.
Yeah, now you look at where they can go. You're basically looking at free agency, maybe trade for Case Keenum. Even then, that sounds like a stopgap
risk. Yeah,
even then, it sounds like you're not building. And to a degree, to bring this full circle, you kind of look at a team that, in a way, shot itself in its foot. You obviously had talented backup quarterbacks. You obviously were building them into a system where they were going to be successful to the point, hey, you were scouting great players. You drafted them. You built them into a starting caliber quarterback, which there's only 31 of outside of your team in the NFL to begin with. You started feeding them off for draft picks that didn't always pan out, or you lost in getting suspensions and fines for other things that you were out there doing that probably weren't necessary. And now when it comes down to it, you need one of those. Like you said, they'd probably love to have Garoppolo back. They'd probably like to have Brissett back.
Yeah,
you know, and now you are going into this great unknown where, listen, no matter how much you want to talk about what the legacy was, the problem ultimately is those fans, this is their reality. This is what they're accustomed to. This is the opposite of the Cleveland Browns and Detroit Lions. They demand a winner. They're not going to embrace this lovable loser anymore.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
You better bring somebody in to fill those shoes. And, you know, as a Colts fan, I've seen it all too well. I knew they were
the Colts are the worst managers of quarterback careers ever.
Right. We weren't replacing Peyton Manning. No one was going to replace Peyton Manning, right? You know, and all the things that led to Peyton's demise and injuries, we allowed to happen to Andrew Luck. And we went through horrible years with, you know, Curtis Painter. I'm sure you're thankful for a lot of this. You know, horrible quarterbacks where you're just kind of pacifying through a year and waiting. And then when you do get that, I don't want to say 1 in a million. Andrew Luck was a fantastic talent, a great quarterback, and certainly at no fault of his own, did not live up to any expectations of what he could have been. You know, that's where the Patriots are going to be. And ironically, there's a lot of parallels there. The line, like you mentioned, is in question. The receiving threats were in question. And those are a lot of things the Colts had going against them as well. You know, even though the defense was mediocre, at the same time, you really didn't have those pieces. They tried, you know. A lot of people forget Andre Johnson's last year. He was a Colt. You know, they tried to bring in those pieces. It just never seemed to kind of build into one team. You can bring in elite players like Randy Moss and they can make it and be successful. You can't free agent a team together. This isn't Madden to a degree.
Yeah. It's not, it doesn't work like that. I think you're 100% correct in saying that. We tried it in Jacksonville when I was there. We tried in bringing in a guy by the name of Jerry Porter. The infamous Jerry Porter. This guy was paid $10 or $11 million for one season, and he ended the season with 10 catches. This guy made roughly $1 million a catch. He was an utter cancer to our franchise. He had a hamstring injury, and from there, refused to show up to meetings, refused to show up to treatment. Left and flew himself out to Miami and hung out there. This dude stole $10 million from the Jacksonville Jaguars, and it was just another lesson. We also brought in a guy by the name of Drayton Florence, a guy who I respect and got a lot of love for and is a good friend of mine. But at the same time, you know, Drayton Florence was a nickel defensive back, and he was a nickel and a safety at best. And we had him out there playing against the number one receiver on every defense or on every offense that we played against. And, you know, it was just a routing by no fault of his own. He was in a bad position, wasn't in a good position to be successful. But it just goes to show that, you know, free agency can be a double-edged sword. And when you're in this position like the Patriots are in right now, I'm not so sure myself that, you know, bringing in a guy like Andy Dalton is going to change anything or is going to be a good enough stopgap to see continued success in New England. I think that the draft is a huge component in terms of trying to create success through acquisition. And maybe you bring in 1 or 2 players who are younger players who are guys going into their second deals, and you bring them in from a free agent standpoint. But you're not going to go and you're grabbing a Randy Moss like they did back in 2007. That was a guy who was a once in a lifetime talent, and he still had enough left in the tank to help you continue to be a dominant offense. But again, like you said, this is going to be a crucial moment, a crucial time in the Patriots transitioning away from Tom Brady. And if they don't make the right decisions, it could have ramifications that ripple through over the next 3 to 4 years. And, hey, a lot of things can change when you lose that, when the band breaks up. When the band breaks up, A lot of things can go south real quick. I mean, can you imagine 3 years from now hearing about Bill Belichick being fired from the New England Patriots? I mean, who could ever imagine something of that nature? But it's a possibility, and it could happen. Jimmy Johnson was fired from the Dallas Cowboys. Different reasoning, but still happened. Nobody would have imagined it. So I think that's a good place to call it on that topic. I think it's also a great segue into talking about the next topic here. What, if any, is the next move that the New Orleans Saints should make with their quarterback position? I think that a lot of people would agree that Tyson Hill has provided a huge spark for that offense, a huge spark for the franchise, and what he has been able to do as a versatile player on the field. But what does that really mean for Drew Brees? And I mean, and this is a hard topic for me because I'm a Purdue alum and Drew Brees is a Purdue guy, and he has played at a consistently high elite level through the course of his career in New Orleans. But I think that we have, in this game in this wild card game that they lost to the Minnesota Vikings, we have seen maybe a few chinks in that armor that Drew Brees has had as an elite level quarterback for so long. He fumbled the ball late in the game when they were trying to go ahead. He threw that interception. I believe it was before the half. Two crucial mistakes that at the end of the day may have cost them that win outside of, the, I guess, flappable complaint that the Saints could have about offensive pass interference in overtime. There are, you can point the finger to a few things that happened with Drew Brees at that quarterback position that really did affect New Orleans' ability to be productive on offense against Minnesota. But also you can point to some of the things that Tyson Hill did at the quarterback position and outside at the receiver spot that also were huge uplifters for the Saints. So I think that puts New Orleans in a bit of a dilemma right now as to who is the future of that franchise going to be behind. And I think that there's not really a clear answer either because, I don't necessarily think that Drew Brees is at a point where you can really look and say that he's not the quarterback that he was. But at the same time, how many years in a row is New Orleans going to go into the playoffs with these lofty expectations of making it back to the Super Bowl? We're now 10 years removed from that, and we haven't seen any progress really to get to justify that they shouldn't be at least thinking about what to do after Drew Brees. What do you think?
Well, first of all, I'm a little bit embarrassed for you. The fact that as a Jacksonville Jaguar, you had the audacity to call out Drayton Florence and didn't even mention Hugh Douglas as the worst free agent signing.
That was before my time, though.
It does not matter. Drayton Florence should be mad at you that you talked to him that way and had no regard for Hugh Douglas just tanking you guys. But regardless, to move forward, I think so much of this revolves around Drew Brees. And, again, I mean, I hate to go back and draw parallels to Tom Brady, Peyton Manning. But at the end of the day, even if you look at the Andrew Luck scenario, we've learned this year, the team has to know. The team has to know the next step. I get it. The dream was that they were going to go to the Patriots with Brees, Kamara, Michael Thomas, one of the best, if not it really becoming one of the best receivers in the game, period. And then obviously you have him have this elaborate send-off, walks off the field, retires, then you build into next year. The problem is we just don't know where Drew Brees is. Is he going to want to continue to put in the work? And is this going to be something that maybe when camp rolls around, he doesn't feel 100% committed? Now, we've never seen that from him in the past, but he's never been in this position.
His work ethic is legendary from what we all know.
But with failures, does it stay at that same level? And you have a very unique scenario here where, like you said, you've got Hill, who's almost like a Swiss Army knife of a quarterback that I don't know that you're going to really be able to make that franchise guy. He's very versatile, but can he be the leader? Then you've also got Teddy Bridgewater, which, listen, like it or not, Teddy Bridgewater stepped up big time when they needed him this year, I think you're in a position where you literally have to look into at least keeping them both.
But I think Teddy Bridgewater's out. I think he's going to go somewhere and get paid to be a starter.
New England.
I think that, and there you go. We didn't even think about that. He could be a prime candidate as a free agent signing for New England. I mean, there are going to be a lot of teams that are taking strong looks at him. Look at Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay is another team that could look at him and say, hey, this guy can uplift our franchise. So, Teddy Bridgewater is not going to be in New Orleans this time next year. He's going to be looking to get that big payday, which he will get, because he proved that with a solid core around him, he can play with the best of them. And the guy is he's shown he can be a good game manager. At the same time, he can make the throws down the field that you need from a big time quarterback. So, he can thank New Orleans for the revitalization of his career because it is definitely going to lead to a huge payday for him.
I don't know for sure. I think if people go back and look at his past failures, that's going to be a big problem to overcome. And
they got the NFL GMs and NFL owners have short memories. They're going to look at what he did, going 5-6-0 with the New Orleans Saints at the quarterback position, and not just through game management. The guy made plays. He made throws. He limited his mistakes. These are things that we didn't see from him earlier in his career, even though, and I'm saying earlier in his career, post-injury. Before his injury in Minnesota, he was playing at a decently high level. But post-injury, we saw, a loss in confidence. We saw a loss in big playability. We saw a loss of mobility, and things, just didn't work out for him necessarily as well. But I do think that, it's a short memory in this league. I mean, let's not forget, Ryan Tannehill got paid $118 million, and he didn't even make a playoff game, much less, go on a 5 or 6 game win streak. So, and look at where he's at now. His career has been totally revived out in Tennessee. So I think that this guy is going to get paid big based on what he did in his time as the starter in New Orleans, because that was crucial to them being able to maintain a successful season.
I don't know that we've ever seen a scenario like this. I mean, listen, for all intents and purposes, at least from the Viking standpoint, Teddy Bridgewater was a bust. He went to the Jets, was essentially a practice squad player, and then found himself in a very, very good system with, you could argue an elite running back in Kamara, and you can't argue an elite wide receiver there with him. And I don't know how much a team is going to look at that and say, we have those pieces here. We have the elite, wide receiver. We have an above average running back. And to his point, Teddy Bridgewater, I mean, this is a guy that literally knows last year he was out of the league. I mean, he was a Jet practice squad member. You're on the cusp of not having a career. Do you not think that maybe he sits back and reflects himself and says, hey, listen, maybe I can take another big payday and get out with what I have and risk 1 year and being cut? Or can I stay here? Drew Brees restructures, which I think is the first part of all this. He has to find some way to restructure this contract, and then maybe keep all 3 pieces and try to build toward a future. To me, it's hard when you look at the Saints to think that Teddy Bridgewater is the future. It's even harder to think that Hill is the future, just because personally, I see the way Hill plays. I don't think they're going to be able to do that as him being the starter. Is it great to have him come in as a kind of special contributor? Sure. Is it nice to have that dual threat? Absolutely. But when he's your franchise quarterback, when he is the man and he gets hurt running a ball in or going out as a receiver, you're in a totally different scenario from your fan base. Your fan base doesn't want to see that. They want to see the marquee, the face, the leader be protected. And you can't, I mean, that's a reason Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, Brett Favre, you name them. There's a reason they weren't lining up as a wide receiver. Sure, they didn't have the same skill set that Hill does, but they also weren't putting them in those positions to be hurt, because I'm sure you know this very well. You have a defense looking over at a quarterback lined up as a receiver. They're probably thinking, here's my chance to get even, not, well, let's worry about him catching the ball.
Put him out of the game. No, you're right. But at the same time, I think you look at a guy like Sean Payton, who is probably I would consider probably the most innovative head coach in the league as far as game plan and scheming to get the most out of his offense. I don't think there's going to be a scenario where if let's speak in hypothetical that Tyson Hill takes over as the starting quarterback for the New Orleans Saints. He's not going to have this guy out at wide receiver. He's out at wide receiver now because that's a function that he can use to get more value out of him as a player on the field. And he knows it throws a monkey wrench into the defensive game planning of the teams that they face. But as the starting quarterback, this guy would be sitting in the same. This would be I could envision this being a Baltimore Ravens-esque style offense where you're focusing on a read option based offense that puts defenses in binds, has them continuously having to check for a quarterback that can beat them with his legs, while at the same time having to defend an all-time great at wide receiver and having to take on a running game that now becomes more expansive because of that read option. So you're really looking at a situation where it makes this offense even more of a threat than it is with Drew Brees. It makes this offense more explosive than it is with Drew Brees. And at the end of the day, we don't need him to throw the ball like Drew Brees. We just need him to manage his throws and not make mistakes and don't sink the ship. But when you have a guy like Mike Thomas out there on the edge, when you have a guy like Ted Ginn Jr. out there, Ted Ginn Jr. is still with the Saints, right? He's Saints. When you have a guy like Ted Ginn Jr. out there who can stretch the field, now, your offense is twice as dynamic and twice as dangerous. And I think at the end of the day, with a guy like Sean Payton, who does have that kind of mad scientist persona and how he can innovate an offense, it just makes that team that much more of a threat. And maybe that's what gets them over the hump. Maybe that's what gets them back to the Super Bowl, is having a guy like that in their offense. We can see a kind of changing in the guard throughout the NFL right now. The league is moving more towards quarterbacks who can provide dual threats to defenses. And those quarterbacks on all of these teams who are those dual threat kinds of quarterbacks, those are the teams that are having the most success in the NFL. Those are the teams that are being picked as favorites in the playoffs right now over the conventional drop back pocket passer. So maybe it is time. Maybe it is time for the NFL, or maybe it is time for the Saints to start considering that that is the next trend of the league and start moving towards a guy like Tyson Hill. I think that really would be something that would be a bold move to make, but at the same time, it could be the move that keeps your franchise up to date with where the league is going. And maybe it's a blessing in disguise for a guy like Drew Brees, because maybe now you have a Bill Belichick that comes knocking on the door and says, hey, come to New England, let's win some Super Bowls together. And I can't imagine that Bill Belichick wouldn't be salivating for an opportunity with a guy like Drew Brees, even more so maybe than a guy like Tom Brady.
Well, the Saints' problem is also going to be depth. I mean, they've got a lot of guys. I mean, you just mentioned them, Ted Ginn Jr., that are, either restricted, unrestricted free agents that are headed out the door. Not only, Teddy Bridgewater, Drew Brees, we just talked about it late, but you've also guys, AJ Klein, Vadamosi. You've got a ton of guys, probably over 20 players. Eli Apple, now that I think about it, I mean, these guys are contributors. They're not, I would say, actually, in the case of, I can't think of his name right off the top of my head, JT Gray, he's a major contributor on special teams. You have to figure out what you're going to do with some of these guys. And sure, on paper, maybe losing a guy like Justin Hardy, Austin Carr, Hogan, their wide receiver, maybe they don't seem like that big of a deal, but, kind of to bring this full circle with what we talked about the Patriots, you start losing depth. You start losing dependable depth, players that know your system. You start to have players go down. Now, just like they had last year, you're in the middle of the season. Maybe you don't have that next man up. Maybe you've got to go out to free agency, and then you're in a whole different world. So I think the Saints, if nothing else, maybe a little bit too much this year, we're kind of in an all-in mode that not a lot of us realized was there until the season is over. Then we start to have all these questions with, hey, what's going to happen with all these free agents? How are they going to restructure these deals? And most importantly, I don't think anyone questions Drew Brees is the quarterback that can get them to the Super Bowl. I think people are beginning to question, okay, what happens when Drew Brees isn't here anymore? And how do you build for that? This has been a huge year for that. I mean, not only just with Tom Brady, but with Drew Brees. We're taking a look at marquee name quarterbacks that lost in the first round of the playoffs that have you kind of scratching your head and saying, hey, are these still the guys? And you kind of have to look no further than look at your younger quarterbacks like Watson, like Lamar Jackson, where, hey, teams want that. Fans want that excitement. They want that dynamic gameplay. They want that, hey, any given moment, this is what can happen. And I'm sorry, guys like Tom Brady, guys like Drew Brees just aren't delivering those moments the same way Deshaun Watson extends a play, goes outside, launches it deep to Hopkins, or, I don't even want to begin to talk about the season that the Ravens have had. So,
Patrick Mahomes, let's not forget about him.
Of course, you've
the
got
guy who may have started it all.
The originator right so far right now. Yeah, exactly. You've kind of got this really interesting dynamic, almost a changing of the guard of what used to be successful versus what we've really seen in the past, with guys like Mike Vick, even go back, guys like Randall Cunningham was successful before, but never to this point, never to championship levels. I mean, we saw it a little bit with Kaepernick, but we all know how that's ended up. Yeah. I think now, a lot of people looked at these mobile quarterbacks, these quarterbacks that extended the play as something less significant as what they were. Oh, Ben Roethlisberger can extend plays too. Oh, Eli Manning could extend plays too. Yeah, but not the way we've seen guys like Deshaun Watson or Russell Wilson extend plays. There's a big difference there. And
they
that's
could
what's
extend plays, to the laterally. They
exactly.
could extend it laterally and get the ball down the field. But, Lamar Jackson can extend it vertically and beat your entire defense to the other side of the field.
Right.
And that's the difference. They can score with their versatility.
It's playing smart. I mean, listen, Mike Vick was an explosive player, but when he got outside, most people knew Mike Vick was going to run as an athlete. Now you've got players like Wilson that, hey, he can go outside and run if he wants, but you also know Patrick Mahomes is an even better example of that. He can run outside if he wants, but he's got a cannon where he can literally launch the ball. And as a defense, you're thinking differently. You're not thinking, here's a rush first quarterback. You're thinking, hey, I've still got to cover my guy.
Got to stay in coverage even longer.
Right, because, Sammy Watkins still has some burner speed, and I have to be worried this ball is going to make it. So it really is interesting to see how fans have perceived those highlights. For those that, let's say if you're a Saints fan, you're just looking at Chiefs highlights. You're just looking at Ravens highlights. And I can't imagine to a small degree, they're not looking at that and saying, hey, we want that too, And then you obviously have a quick exit in the playoffs and things kind of fall apart. You probably look at your team and say, maybe it is time to reevaluate. It's honestly something that's great for the league. I've always been, you mentioned Bernard Pollard a couple weeks ago in the show, and I think back to when Bernard Pollard blew out Tom Brady's leg, and you really at the time were like, well, in a hurtful way, you were like, well, Tom Brady, he's a guy that's easy to hate, right? Supermodel wife, one of the best ever. And then afterwards you realized, hey, the landscape without Tom Brady in the NFL is really not what we thought it would be. It's not as fun to watch without those guys. So
you need somebody to hate.
you need right. Batman wasn't as fun when there was no Penguin. There's got to be a villain.
Joker,
right. So there has to be a villain to a degree, and Tom Brady and the Patriots really embraced that role. But to that point, if you don't have some of these players that create great rivalries and you just don't have the same dynamic in the NFL. And I don't know where we're going to go with this because, listen, at the end of the day, Mahomes, obviously Watson, these are special players. You're not just going to go find these guys. They're as special as your Peyton Mannings, your Tom Brady's in a very different and unique skill set.
Absolutely.
There's a reason people still talk about Vick and Cunningham the way that they do. We just didn't see that up until this year. And when you see it, it's a very cool thing to behold. I think we had an incredible year as far as fans this year because we got to see so much. I mean, Lamar Jackson this year may have had one of the best seasons I can ever remember. Not maybe statistically in terms of the numbers, okay? He had a masterful season as far as just making football fun to watch. Christian McCaffrey went out in doing what he did, I think a lot of people overlook players like Roger Craig and Marshall Faulk. When you make accomplishments that those two players made,
yeah,
that
Marshall
can't be
Faulk,
understated.
yeah, one of the most underrated running backs in NFL history. The prelude to the Christian McCaffrey phenomenon that we're witnessing right now, and also to a degree, I feel like Christian McCaffrey is it falls in that same batch of running backs, which I would include also Maurice Jones-Drew in that batch of running backs. A guy who caught the ball a lot out of the backfield, a guy who ran at an elite level. Christian McCaffrey, I think, is kind of that. He's kind of the embodiment of those two running backs all in one package. You can catch it well out of the backfield, over 1,000 yards receiving, over 1,000 yards rushing. I mean, come on, you don't see that kind of thing happen. And that has kind of brought back a bit of relevance to the running back position, because the running back position has been in a bit of a weird space, I feel like, over the last 4 or 5 years. If you look at the last, I guess, let's take a look from the last maybe 20 years of the NFL. The running back position has been the one position that has kind of gone through these different phases of running back by committee. Then you had wildcat running back. Then you had, kind of a scat running back who you just sent out to catch the ball out of the backfield. Didn't really handle the ball that much. But these kind of players like Falk, like Jones-Drew, like McCaffrey have kind of have consistently kind of brought back some of those traditional, more conventional styles that we start to lose every so often in the NFL with the running back position. And I think that Christian McCaffrey, it should be, he's one of the best players in the NFL, bar none, because of that. He's a guy who can get the ball 25, 30 times a game and still catch 10, 12, 15 passes out of the backfield in the same game. And that's huge. And like you said, there's kind of a moving, a kind of a shift in the guard of the NFL. And that quarterback position is really kind of moving into its own new phase, where you have quarterbacks who are now, a triple threat quarterback. And by triple threat, I mean, they can throw the ball, they can run the ball, and they can extend the play both for the run and the pass. They can move the ball around the field laterally down to sideline and make a 40-yard throw and put it on the money in ways that we've never seen. And that's stretching defenses to their absolute limit, because that means that their defense, if you can't get pressure on this guy, your DBs have got to stay in coverage 6, 7, 8 seconds. And how many defensive backs do you know that can actually do that? I don't think there's many at all that can hold their coverage and whether it's zone or man, can stay in a position to make a play on defense for as long as these guys can stretch those plays out. So we'll see how it plays out. And I really do think that you're right. It has been an exciting time to be a fan of the NFL because of it.
Yeah, I mean, I really feel like if it wasn't for Jackson's incredible season, the 1,000 would have been, made such a bigger deal. I mean, if you talk about the history of the league, it doesn't happen. It didn't happen all that often. And probably heard my mic get bumped there. To a degree, though, when you take a look at Roger Craig, when you take a look at Marshall Faulk, those were far different times to play in terms of, what they were able to do on the field and the pieces they were. Christian McCaffrey is just a special athlete, and I think that's what it comes down to. We used to talk about special players, Ben Roethlisberger, special player, the way he extended plays. Eli Manning, go back to the Super Bowl. The only reason the Tyree catch was successful was because he extended the play. But we knew at that moment, Eli was extending to throw the ball. Yeah. There was no risk for him. He wasn't going to run.
He's not getting that first down running. Yeah.
When you talk about what we have now, we have true athletes at the quarterback position that are able to go out and extend a play with the risk of, hey, I'm going to throw and run. And that's a dynamic. That's an unpredictability as a fan that you love to see. And it just so happens that we have so many quarterbacks right now in the league that can do that, and they play smarter. Listen, Andrew Luck was a runner. RG3 was a runner, but they didn't play smart. They didn't always protect themselves. And that's what led to, I guess if you had to, had to go back in time, would you really think RG3's career would have been longer than Andrew Luck's? But at the same time, whether you want to blame Shanahan or not, RG3 not playing smart impacted his career longevity and his usefulness as a player. He really isn't viewed as a starter.
Yeah.
So, now I think, almost if you look at him sacrificing some of his career for that, I'm sure that he's shown players like Lamar, like Mahomes, hey, you got to play smart. You have to protect your body too. There's going to be another play that you can make downfield or with your feet. And I think he's really kind of shown these younger quarterbacks, hey, I don't have to sell it every single play. Every single play isn't going to be the last play, but it could be if I don't play smart. And they've done a masterful job of making sure that they've protected themselves. And look at the landscape of the playoffs right now. There's exactly a reason why most of these quarterbacks we're talking about are in the playoffs and have a very high probability of winning this week.
Yeah,
it's because of what they bring to the table. And like I said, when you go back to look at the quarterbacks and teams we've just talked about, I'm sorry, Drew Brees and Tom Brady don't bring that dynamic at all.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're 100% right. I think that that we're witnessing in a sense the dying off of one breed of quarterback for the ascension of another, and we have great memories, of course, from these quarterbacks, but the league is evolving, and that evolution is going to ripple throughout the entire sport. And we'll see other parts of the game catch up to it. Defenses will catch up to it. There's going to be a new style of defense. There's going to be a new tweener position in defense that will account and react to this changing of the guard. It always happens. It's like the force. The force will balance itself out regardless of the variables that shift the momentum from one side or the other. And like you said, this may be the last year that we see the traditional quarterback being able to get into the postseason, being able to make these deep kind of runs that we're witnessing now from the more versatile, more mobile, and but at the same time smart and precise striker. I would call the quarterback position somewhat of a striker. They're guys who can stretch the field but can still be accurate in the shots they take down the field with the ball. So it's going to be interesting to see. It's going to be fun to see. But let's talk about these games a little bit this weekend, and let's make some picks to kind of close out this podcast with who we think is going to come home or going to advance, rather, from that position in the divisional round. Let's look at the first game here. Let me see. We have the Minnesota Vikings going to San Francisco on Saturday. Who do you like in this, and tell me why?
You go first, and then I'll follow you up.
All right. Well, I'm liking, honestly, when I look at this situation, I think that the Minnesota Vikings are coming into this game pretty hot. That was a huge statement win that they had against the Saints in overtime. And as much as I grew up a San Francisco fan, as much as I recognize what kind of season that they've had in San Francisco, I am going to go with the Minnesota Vikings on the upset. The team is on fire at the moment. I think that they've kind of ushered themselves into a new level of play, into the next level of play. And at the end of the day, the 49ers will find themselves in a position of being in front of a buzzsaw. This is a team that is now elated by their success in New Orleans, probably going into the hardest atmosphere of all of the places to play at as an away team in this playoff, even more so, I think, than Seattle. New Orleans is an utterly it's bar none, I feel, the hardest place to play in the playoffs right now. And they went into New Orleans and they got it done, and they got it done their way. And like Kirk Cousins said, you like that? He made the play to win the game. He made 2 clutch throws to put them over the top. And I think that they're going to ride that wave of momentum. And I think that they're going to go into San Francisco and they're going to beat the 49ers. I know I'll get hell for it. I'll get hell for saying it, but I feel like that is the way this game is going to play out. San Fran ended their season with they ended with a huge win against Seattle, but there are still question marks on that team that you have, and one of them is their quarterback, Jimmy Garoppolo. If you can get consistency out of him, of course, he can play with the best of them. But I feel like this game, and part of what is so big about the playoffs, the NFL playoffs, is being able to sustain momentum. And the momentum that they're coming into San Francisco with, I think will carry them to a late game, maybe an overtime win again. But I'm going with Minnesota in this first game in San Fran this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, you make very good points, very valid points, but I think it comes down to who I trust more. And it's interesting you mentioned there, you've got a dynamic here with two quarterbacks that are a little bit hard to trust. Garoppolo doesn't have the experience. Kirk Cousins really seems to just be playing to try to prove critics wrong. So to me, when I look at it, I know what Jimmy can do. He beat Russ, Rodgers, Brees. He's done that. I don't trust Kirk Cousins to do the same. I think if you have a good game from Garoppolo, it's going to be all it takes. I do believe, as you said, momentum is a massive thing in the NFL. And obviously taking a big win, a close game into this is going to do nothing but help bond them as a team. But I also think they're a little bit more battered. They're a little bit more worn. And Kirk Cousins, to me, seems to be a quarterback that really goes up and down on emotion. And I feel like if he starts to have a bad game here, it's going to be his demise because he never seems to recompose himself. Garoppolo, I think, knows what he has to do.
We just witnessed him recompose himself in New Orleans with
one game. The
biggest game of his career.
To that point, because it was really the only game that mattered that he had an opportunity to win. Well, let me put it to you this way. If I told you one quarterback was going to lead to the demise of this game, would you put your house on Garoppolo or Cousins?
Fair enough. I would say if the game was to be lost by one of these quarterbacks, who would it be? Kirk Cousins, I would pick. That would be my betting money would be on Kirk Cousins. But maybe it shouldn't be, because if you look at it, Jimmy Garoppolo has not – what are the top defenses he's played against in the last 3 to 4 weeks, of the regular season? I don't think he really played against, very tough defenses at all. And, he's been a quarterback who has shown streaky moments. And not to say that Kirk Cousins hasn't done the same, but, at the highest moment of pressure when we would have expected Kirk Cousins to fold against Drew Brees, who blinked first. Drew Brees blinked multiple times. Drew Brees made throws that were ill-advised. Drew Brees fumbled the ball. Drew Brees threw interceptions, things that we always viewed as uncharacteristic of a quarterback of his caliber. He made the mistakes that ultimately played a huge part in dooming the Saints. Where on the other end, Kirk Cousins made the throw of his career to Thiggin late in the in their first drive during the overtime period. That was a throw for the ages in his career. And he followed it up by putting the dagger in the heart of thousands of Who Dat fans and the entire Who Dat nation, regardless of what they want to complain about. That was Kirk Cousins who did that. So that, to me, shows that you've taken a step as a player, mentally, physically, and as a leader. You've taken a step and shown your team that when the chips are down, when everything's on the line, I can make it happen. This wasn't a fluke that he made happen. This was a pass that was put on the dime to get them down to the 2 or 3 yard line. And then he followed it up with one of the more difficult passes to make in the NFL is that over the shoulder corner fade route in the end zone. We watch quarterbacks overthrow that route routinely. We watch quarterbacks underthrow that route routinely. But a good, solid, top level, consistent passer can make that throw. And Kirk Cousins made it on the same. He made that throw in a way that we would have expected Drew Brees to make that throw. So I think that, yes, if I'm looking at the entire picture, the entire scope of things, and I'm deciding who am I going to take over, when the chips are on the line, from what we've seen throughout the course of the season, I think that, yeah, a lot of people are going to look and say that the first person to fold should be Kirk Cousins. But I think based on what he has done in the present, in the present term, in the present space, he has shown that he's not the same guy that we saw back earlier in the football season. And at a time like this, it's the perfect time for an upset like this to happen. So I'll stick with my pick. You almost had me, but I stick with my pick. I'm going with Minnesota.
Everything you just said about Garoppolo, I could equally say. With Cousins, I could equally say about Garoppolo in the Sunday night game against the Seahawks, where I think he started the game 9 for 9, and yeah, they've got a better defense in my opinion, but in a tough place to play, in a game they had to win to secure the division and not be in the wild card. He went out and played just as good in a place that's very hard to play. So obviously, so is New Orleans. I've seen more this year that lends me to think that Garoppolo is a more stable quarterback. And just taking the defense out of it, I think they have a better defense as well than I would Kirk Cousins.
Yeah. I won't disagree on the defensive side. San Fran definitely has a better defense than Minnesota, but Minnesota's defense is competent. They have a competent defense. They may play a little bit. They play a little bit too much soft zone for my liking, but they do have competent players. They have a hell of a pass rush, and that's going to be huge for this game, is who can get to the quarterback the quickest. Now, that is, I will concede that that defensive end position in San Francisco with Bosa is going to be that's going to be a huge matchup for the Minnesota Vikings, and I'm hoping that they're smart enough to know that they need to chip out on Bosa every single pass play of the game. But we'll see, how they play that. But
to recap, you went with the sketchier of the two quarterbacks and the worst defense. I cannot wait to hear your next prediction.
Because of momentum. I say that because the NFL playoffs, it's hard to explain, but momentum plays such a huge factor. And all it takes is one turnover. All it takes is one fumble, and the same thing that we saw happen to New Orleans can happen to San Francisco. And when I look at when I look at the moments where Minnesota struggled in that game against New Orleans, Kirk Cousins didn't make that crucial mistake of turning the ball over. He didn't fumble it, and he didn't give away the fumble. He didn't give away the interception. And in some cases, he just took the sack instead of, trying to make a play or trying to do something that would be him overextending himself and causing disaster for his team. So those are things that, to me as a player, looking at it from the outside, I can say, hey, there's going to be times in the game where there's going to be an opportunity for him to be rattled. But he is shown in an extremely high pressure situation, as he was in New Orleans, that he's not going to sink the team when those situations pop up and rear their ugly heads. So again, I think that that's one of my reasons why I feel like the bye week for a division or for the top seeds is such a dangerous thing. You have to rebuild your momentum as a team coming off of a cold start with a week off of football. Whereas you're going up against these teams, the winner of a wild card game that now has momentum, that now has confidence built up. They have twice the confidence to start the game than you do, even with a better record, because of that week that you had off. That makes things very difficult. And again, it doesn't mean that I'm not saying that it's 100%, but I'm saying that it's crucial in the playoffs for the NFL. When you come off of that week, that bye week, we're going to learn a lot about San Francisco in the first 2 quarters of that game and how that bye week truly affected them. But these teams that don't have to deal with that and are riding that wave emotionally and be able to make corrections and make adjustments and game plan based on what they know worked against certain defensive fronts, certain offensive fronts in the wild card game. Because we all know the NFL is a copycat league, and a lot of teams run the exact same formations. They run the same plays out of it. it gives you a little bit of an advantage as the wild card team to come in with that momentum. So we'll see how it plays out. But I truly believe that, Minnesota has a really good opportunity to get this win.
I'll move forward to the Titans and the Ravens, where I'm sure you're going to go for the other team in purple here. But to me, listen, first and foremost, congratulations to the Titans for everything they just did. Literally dethroned the Patriots, but it's not going to work against the Ravens. You actually just made a very good point. We're going to learn a lot about the 49ers the first half of that game. I think we're going to learn a lot about the Titans the first half of this game. I really think the first two Ravens possessions are probably going to determine how this game goes, because the challenge I see for the Titans is if they get behind early, which seems improbable not to happen with Lamar Jackson at the helm, the rushing is not going to happen. You're not going to be down 2 scores, whether that's 10 or 14 points, and run the ball the same way you just did against New England. Mm-hmm. And I think that ultimately is going to be the turning point. Can the defense stand up on those first 2 drives? Can they keep points off the board, or at least limit it to 7? Can you hold them? Can you
7
hold
or
them
6
to 1?
points?
Right, exactly. It's a victory in those first drives if you hold them to 1 touchdown or 2 field goals. That to me is really going to be what determines this game. I think across the board, Baltimore is a better team. They're not as beat up as New England. I also think, I know you just mentioned momentum, and I do believe that it's a big part of the NFL, but I also think there has to be almost a draining effect that the Titans have. Like they slayed the monster,
they
right?
overextended themselves to
they beat Goliath, right? Yeah. And now there's that letdown that's going to come from that. Almost as if they just won their championship, right? I can't think that that's not going to impact them.
Yeah, no, you're 100% correct. There's no this is a much different scenario than Minnesota, San Fran. This Baltimore team has an insurmountable amount of momentum on their side, just simply from the season that they've had. And I think that, they're going to, I mean, like you said, the first 2 drives are going to say a lot, but at the end of the day, there's too much. This is too complete of a team on every facet for Tennessee to think for 1 second that they can win it with just the running game. It's not going to happen. Because, like you said, if they get down more than 1 score, if they're down by 10 or more, then the emphasis has to come off of the running game. Because the running game does what? It shortens the game. It's going to make it a shorter game. You're not going to have the time to recover from a 10-point deficit. You're going to have to lean on your passing game. We all know they do have a competent passing attack, but not a explosive passing attack. And that is what they're going to need in order to keep pace with what Baltimore brings to the table. And with that defense that Baltimore has, that is a tall order indeed. I think that, Tennessee is going to show, they're going to flex their muscles with their running game early, but it's just not going to be something that can keep up with the quick pace, fast attack that you're going to see from Baltimore. I think Baltimore slaughters them fairly easy. After the first competitive quarter, you're going to start to see things go downhill for Tennessee in a fast way. I could see it being a 2 or 3 score game by the time you hit the 4 to 5 minute mark in the fourth quarter. So, everybody, look, nobody's going to blame Tennessee for getting slaughtered in this game, because we only expected or hoped that they would slay the dragon in the New England Patriots. Everything after that, hey, we're not going to hold it against you. You guys had a great season. You guys brought down the evil empire, and that's the most that we could have asked from you, and that's the most that we expected of you to do, because now, with that being said and done, you can take your leave, because you're going to run into a force that is far beyond anything that you'll be able to defend against. So yeah, I'm definitely going with Baltimore in this game. It's going to be a runaway train as far as that's concerned, and they'll be moving on to that AFC title game.
I will transition over to the Texans and the Chiefs. And this, to me, for a lot of the things we just talked about, is going to be a lot closer of a game. I think that people actually give it credit for it. When you look at the numbers, the numbers are close, but in really any meaningful category. If you look at Houston, I think they average about 23.5 points per game. Their defense gives up about 24. Kansas City, I think they average about 28 points a game. Their defense gives up 19. They're probably less than 20 yards away from each other on offensive yardage. And to me, it's going to be, and this is where it's tricky. It's going to be the little things, the small details, the one play, if you will. Mm-hmm. And while right now I'll give the edge to Kansas City because they're going to be at home and because I think they are just piece by piece, maybe outside of receivers because DeAndre Hopkins, maybe outside of linemen because of Tunsil, they are a better team piece by piece. When you talk about, Frank Clark, Hardman,
Mm-hmm.
I just feel like they got a little bit too much. The one variable in living on the East Coast, in being 45 minutes from Philadelphia, the one variable has always been Andy Reid. Andy Reid can screw this game up in a hurry.
Yeah.
And I don't trust his clock management, his decision-making, his play calling. If I've seen one coach continually melt down in the playoffs, it's been Andy Reid. And I see Bill O'Brien being that steady level, continue with what's going to work. Don't make rash decisions. Don't play emotionally. Play smart football. And that's one thing. You can have all the players, you can have all the pieces, but it starts at the coach. And I don't trust Andy Reid near as much as I trust Bill O'Brien. I see the Chiefs winning, but I could also very, very easily see an Andy Reid implosion where fans literally sit back and scratch their head and say, my God, how did they lose this game when every single category really has them equal to or better than the Texans? But it comes down to that game planning, scheming, and really just staying true to what your team is good at. And I think that's going to be the one variable here. Andy Reid can be the reason they win, but he can also much more be the reason they lose.
Yeah, and that's those are all good points. This is a tricky game. This is a tricky game because I feel like for Kansas City to give themselves the best chance, or for it to be a more sound prediction for Kansas City to win, they have to come out in this game and they have to put up points quick and in a hurry. I almost feel like this game may end up being a shootout simply because both defenses are, suspect in areas, and you don't want it to be close if you're Kansas City because the more that this Texans team sticks around, the more that there is that they stay within striking range of a tie or a lead, the more dangerous it is for Kansas City because of everything you said about Andy Reid. The pressure begins to mount, and then decisions have to be made. And plays have to be called in ways to try and put the game away. And like you said, Andy Reid is the guy who can have that meltdown. But also at the same time, I think this game is going to come down a lot to the offensive lines. I think that you look at what happened to Deshaun Watson against the Buffalo Bills. This guy was sacked 7 times. And that was 7 times through 3 quarters. And he had to make some miraculous plays. I mean, did anybody have any doubt that he was going to be sacked when he had a player, on a Buffalo player from each side sandwich him and what should have been a sack to seal it for Buffalo to close that drive out, and it turned into what would at the end of the day spell the doom for the Buffalo Bills because Deshaun Watson's amazing, uncanny ability to stay upright, get himself out of a tough situation, and make a play. But that is going to be what I think is, in the end, going to spell doom for Houston, is the fact that they can't protect their quarterback to save their lives. This guy is one of the most sacked quarterbacks in the NFL, one of the most hit quarterbacks in the NFL. And for some reason, that's kind of been the history in Houston, is that they're a franchise that has continuously been unable to protect their quarterback in times that call for, clutch plays to be made. And, when you look on the other side, Kansas City Chiefs with their offensive line coach, Andy Heck, who was my offensive line coach in Jacksonville. This guy is an absolute master at helping his offensive line understand what they're protecting, why they're protecting, and how to protect it. And so I would I would predict that because they have an advantage from a coaching standpoint and a talent standpoint, that is going to give the decided edge to Kansas City, because when plays have to be extended, when a quarterback has to wait on routes to develop, he's going to have Patrick Mahomes is going to have more time in the pocket to allow those things to happen than Deshaun Watson is. Deshaun Watson is going to have to rely on his ability as an athlete far too often. And at the end of the day, there's bound to be a mistake that's made in trying to create something down the field while under extreme duress. And Deshaun Watson, for everything that he's done, for as good as he's been in those situations at extending and bailing out his offensive line, which has done a horrible job at protecting him, that's not going to get you to a Super Bowl. That's not going to get you to an AFC title game. So it's going to, it'll work. He'll have some success with it, but at the end of the day, it's going to be too much for him to overcome. And I think that's really where you're going to see the Houston Texans fail. I think that above all, the offensive line play of both of these teams is the X factor that is going to determine who the winner of this game is, because they both don't have great defenses. They don't have great defenses. And I think that there's a lot of things that are, for lack of a better word, like you said, there's a lot of things that are equal in this matchup, but that is one department of this game that is not equal. And it's going to be a huge factor in deciding who wins.
Yeah, no, I would agree with all those sentiments as well. I think when we move forward to the Seahawks and Packers game, these games are traditionally very close. Obviously, like kind of we talked about, there's some nuances here that I think are going to be unique in this game as opposed to the three we talked to, but obviously a lot of the same kind of smash mouth football concepts being used in terms of running the ball, especially if we've got a weather game. I think I learned a lot last week against Seattle. I had some questions, some reservations about how you were going to have Marshawn Lynch come in. What was his health going to be? How was he going to react to going back and learning? You can't imagine those plays are as what they once were, so to see him, to know that they brought in Turbin, I get it. They did have I think the fourth ranked, rushing game in the league, but let's be honest, it's not even the same cast of characters running the ball now. Yeah. So I also have a big question mark about, Metcalf. Yeah, he just lights out in Philly, right? But this is going to be a cold game for him. This is going to be a hostile environment for him. I cannot stand that he wears that bibby as a mouthpiece, but moving on with that, he cannot be the main focal point this week as he was last week. Green Bay's defense is just too good. The crowd is going to be too into it. Lambeau Field is too much of a factor for that to take place. And then obviously the pass rush for Seattle. I mean, what's Clowney going to be like? If Clowney isn't 100%, I really looked back and, as a Colts fan, I'm well-versed in Jadeveon Clowney. You're probably the reason the Texans drafted him. But at the same time, I got the feeling he was out there as a decoy. He wasn't 100%. He was making them commit. He still brought enough pressure. I don't think that works against a quarterback like Aaron Rodgers. And I hate to use this guy's name, but if you start to do that, you're going to have Jimmy Graham out there, who's a big body, really hasn't shown the propensity to be that receiving tight end that you need.
Not the same guy that he was in New Orleans.
But I'm telling you, if you start to get that pass rush and it's not effective and Jadeveon Clowney is limited in movement, I could see Aaron Jones, who's almost the forgotten guy here, really start to take over this game, especially you start to run hard on that, left side, if that's where Clowney's going to be. And I just think the health of the teams factor into this a lot more than the other games we talked about. Yeah. And listen, you've really got a banged up Seattle team. They kind of limped their way into the playoffs more than anything else. And I think the Packers are a team that are going to make them pay for that.
No, I agree. I think this is a game that's a lot easier to look at and really pick apart and decipher who is going to have the advantage. And like you said, with Giovanni, with Clowney being in the position he is with that abdominal injury, they're going to test him, and as they should. They're going to run. They're going to bring that running game. They're going to feature that first and foremost to try and see if he's going to be able to hold up against blocks from the O-line, whether it's chipping up to backers or whether it's double teaming them in the power game. They're going to try and test his whether he's going to have the resolve to hold the line. And we'll know a lot pretty fairly quickly in regards to whether he can do that. If he can't, they're going to continue to attack him, and eventually he's either going to re-injure or they're going to alter their personnel to get him out of that position or keep him away from those situations where he has to hold up in the run game. And I mean, at the end of the day, like you said, this is a Seattle team that has gotten to this point in the playoffs off sheer determination. I would think more so than just having the pieces in place to take those steps and towards winning in the playoffs and advancing to the NFC title game. I think this is kind of where the buck stops with them. But, I tip my hat to them. These guys have shown that as an organization, there's no quitting them. But I think that the Packers have a decided advantage. They're far healthier. They will have more in way of leeway to come into this game a little bit rusty and not necessarily have to pay a price for that. Because of the injuries that they're dealing with over in Seattle. And once they find their rhythm, I think that they'll be able to consistently put pressure on Seattle and put points on the board. And that may be all that they need to do in order to get the win. Also, you're in Lambeau. You're at Lambeau Field. It's going to be freezing cold. It's going to be a Green Bay kind of game. And it's hard enough to win those games healthy, much less win them with about, 2/3 of the strength or maybe even half the strength that you usually have as a team. So I would expect to see Green Bay come out with this win with a pretty sound win over Seattle.
Yeah, no, I would agree. The things that you talked about there, what won them the game in Philly, it's almost going to inverse themselves. I mean, as you just mentioned there, Jadeveon Clowney is going to become the liability more than the main focal point on defense. And then offense, Metcalf, we really don't have anything proven. Is he going to be able to go out there and make himself the focal point of this offense and take control of this game the way he just did, on clutch fourth down plays to seal the game? I don't think that nothing against him as a player. He's got a bright future. He's a very talented receiver. He slid way too far in the draft naturally from what we can see now. But is he going to have that mentality to push through Lambeau Field where we've seen some of the all-time greats kind of fall apart? It's going to be a fun game, but it's interesting you kind of use that. It's going to be a Lambeau Field. It's going to be a Packers game. And I really believe that. It's going to be one of those old school Packers football games that more often than not, the Packers tend to win.
Yeah, I think in the playoffs, I think the Packers only have one loss historically at Lambeau Field. I think they only have one loss. And, I'm not saying that necessarily it's, I'm not sure if that's the 100% truth of it, but I think I saw a stat somewhere that as far as the playoffs go, at Lambeau Field, historically in their history, they have one loss at home. So
it seems right. Like I can't think of the one big loss they had there, right? Like I can't think of the times they were beaten there.
Yeah.
And that's, I think maybe, I try not to live too much in football stats, and I know they mean a lot, and historical reference obviously has a lot to do with the NFL, but the fact of the matter is you and I can't sit here right now and talk about meaningful times the Packers dropped the playoff game in Lambeau That's all we need to know, because I guarantee you every single player in that Seahawks locker room is thinking the same thing. When was the last time they lost a game here in the playoffs? How long has it been? 10, 15, 20 years? Who was the quarterback then? So they know they're going into a tough place. And Pete Carroll's a great coach. I'm sure he's going to do everything he can to have his team prepared, but he's not a doctor. He's a football coach. And I think right now there's two things that the Seahawks need. They need health, and they need time to get healthy. And they just don't have that.
Yeah, they don't have it. And at the end of the day, that's where I think they just kind of run out of room on the rope. They just don't have the physical health to actually maintain throughout the course of this playoffs. Even if, for the sake of argument, they ended up beating the Packers, can they do it again in the next week to get to the Super Bowl with all of the damage that we know that they've taken? It just they would falter out eventually, and I think that this is just going to be too much for them to really overcome, and we're going to see these guys fall apart late. They'll put up. I think it'll be a competitive game for the first half, but that second half you're going to start to see things kind of come apart and unravel. Which, hey, I don't think anybody's going to blame them if that happens, because they were playing an uphill battle to begin with. So with all of that being said, Ryan Moody, for anybody who's just joined in, we're already 2 hours into it, but Ryan Moody 21, this guy is the king of all things Madden in the YouTube hemisphere. This guy
didn't even talk Madden. We didn't even talk Madden. That's the thing. But what I love about it is that you're so knowledgeable about football, which is a good thing. That's really an awesome thing, having you on here, being able to talk football, and to a certain extent, you're more in tune with the details of the football world than I am when it comes to the transactional parts and things that really play into the culture of the sport itself. I think that you've got a great eye for it, and I think that you do make a ton of compelling arguments about everything that we've talked about here today. It's been sensical, and it has been, a great time, and a great time talking and chatting about it. So with all of that being said, tell the people where they can find you. Go ahead and plug your channel a little bit if you feel like it, and maybe we'll end the stream with a quick Madden chat, because I actually played it yesterday. Every time I jump on this damn game and go online and play MUT, I end up jumping off the game just in disgust. Like, this game is garbage. But yeah, well, I made it easy. My channel is simply Ryan Moody 21, all together, RYAN MOODY, the number 2, the number 1. If you want to follow me over on Twitter at Shutdown Safety, all together, the word shutdown, the word safety. Pretty easy to find. So yeah, no, it's funny that you bring up Madden, because that was our initial concept, was to talk about Madden. I guess I set us on the wrong foot asking you about your helmets and footballs, but I can only imagine as a gamer how frustrating Madden is to play right now, in looking at the way it doesn't really replicate football, the way a lot of the things to tie this together, a lot of the things we just talked about, personnel, injuries, health, coaches, history, stats, where you're playing, who you're playing against. All that really doesn't seem to factor into Madden a whole lot. If you go back and you listen to the way we just recapped, or I guess previewed these games, you don't go into Madden and play that same way. You don't go into Madden and say, all right, we're going to do the Seahawks, and I know that Jadeveon Clowney's going to be injured, not 100%. I'm going to run the ball to his side with Aaron Jones. It doesn't matter. The pass rush doesn't even have to come from Clowney. You don't go get Jadeveon Clowney the next offseason because you want a good elite pass rusher on the outside. Furthermore, we talked about, you go back and even just to the earlier conversation, the nature of where the game is now, and hybrid players. Sure, they do a great job, hybrid quarterbacks, a fast quarterback, mobile quarterback, running quarterback. But you actually mentioned, we didn't touch on it at all, unfortunately, how do teams combat that? I think the way a team gets to combat that is kind of like players like Mark Barron. You get your players that started in the secondary, Cato June, if you want to go further back, your safeties that transition down to a linebacker. Now you've got a guy that has that speed, has that power, has
that rover position, who can make a tackle in the run game, but still has the same speed to be able to track down a quarterback who has that versatility that you see and a lot of our more agile quarterbacks in today's game. Yeah,
exactly. You don't have that in Madden. In Madden, you can take just about any linebacker and do laps in the center of the field with him.
Oh my God, dude! What?
And that's it, right? It doesn't really matter. Whether
that
you have
kills me. That kills me about this game is that because this is how I play Madden when I'm online playing. I'll force the guy I'm going against to have to play football because I'm running plays I'm playing my game in the way that I would envision it being played in real life. So I'm not going to just I'm not running a stretch play to get to the sideline. As soon as you start running for the sideline, I'm cutting straight up the hash and going straight up the middle of your defense to gain yardage. And what frustrates me is when you drop back to pass in this game. As soon as you get into passing the ball on Madden, that's when you really start to just that's when everything falls apart for me. I watch a guy cover the entire field with a linebacker during the course of one play. He can play 4 different routes. And I'm like, how is this football? This is not football. This guy is covering the post route. Then he comes off the post and covers the cross route. Then he goes from the cross route and covers the comeback route. And he can make a play on any one of the passes, no matter how long I try to wait it out. And then let's not even talk about these guys with the 97, 98, 99 rated entire rosters where you can't even do anything. Nothing. It's unbelievable.
We needed this energy in the beginning of the show, but you're absolutely right. The problem becomes that, at least to me, in Madden, as a defensive player, you have the ability to freelance way too much, and you don't have any adaptive players on the offensive side. You don't have a receiver that is going to alter how he runs his route to avoid the player that's doing laps in the middle of the field. You don't have the secondary player on the other side that's going to cover differently because this player is, running sprints in front of him. Mm-hmm. And it allows him, as you said, to key off. There's only so many routes that the game runs. and it all runs them, like I've talked about, sadly, in absolute straight lines. Yes. So once you've memorized the actual route tree, which there's only so many routes you can run, period, you can have a player masterfully go from point A to point B to point C and just kind of round robin the field and cut off routes along the way. And the other side of it, and I don't think this gets talked about as enough because, people have this Madden shame. If you're not good, you're Madden shamed. It is so distracting as a player to sit there and watch something so unconventionally happen where you just have rapid movement in the center of the screen. No one keys that. You're never taught from an offensive standpoint to look. You're looking at movement. You're looking for the movement to generate where to throw the ball to, where something's going to open up, where the space is being created. And in Madden, that's almost a positive. From a defensive standpoint, listen, I'm sure you played with people. Freelancers get benched quickly unless you're a good freelancer, unless you're Ed Reed, right?
Yeah.
Unless you have the art of freelancing perfected, where when you go to the sidelines after inevitably giving up a play, which Ed Reed did, you better have a resume behind you where the coach says, "Hey, you made one mistake, but we'll give it back because you made the other 10 plays." Exactly. Bob Sanders, prime example. All right, we'll give you the one. We'll give you the one. You made the other 9. No big deal. In Madden, there's no risk versus reward.
There's no punishment for freelancing.
Yes. Even from a stamina standpoint. If you made it to where the defensive player could only run for 3 seconds before he significantly slowed down, then you would be in a different mindset because you can't
pick and choose where you do that.
Exactly. You can't go from every route to now if the quarterback goes to the outside, now I've got just as much speed to keep an angle to get you out of bounds.
Yeah.
And the whole really problem here, and I know people will hate to hear this, the whole problem really is the God mode camera. The defense has more of a vision of the field than the offense does as far as what's happening. And that's why, if defensive players could look at the other side of the ball when they played, I mean, some of the things in Madden that aren't there, like line splits, like distance between linemen, things that really matter, how gaps are going to be attacked or how protection is set up. If you really watch football, if you go to an NFL game, you buy a ticket in an end zone and you look at line splits, you can tell almost instantly whether it's a pass or rush play. Just the way this, I'm better than anybody. Yeah. Just the way the linemen are actually positioned. In Madden, you don't have that. The linemen line up almost in the exact same position, whether it's run or pass. There's no respect to line splits at all.
That's a huge detail that I wouldn't expect a person to necessarily know. Splits are different. Like, okay, for instance, let's say we're running a play action to the front to the left. We're running a play action. Let's call it, 37 blast or run past 37 blast boss with a route attached to it on a bootleg coming to the backside. The splits on the front side of the offensive line are different than the splits on the back side of the offensive line for a reason. Because you want to be able to stretch the front side of the defense to get the linebackers to move towards the stretch. That you want them to feel like there's a front side zone that they have to play against, even though it's going to be play action. So you're going to have wider splits because you have to have wider angles to get the front side blocks taken care of. You want to sell those front side blocks so that the defender actually plays it honestly, as if it's a run play. That requires you to have better splits on the front. On the backside, you're going to have slightly tighter splits because you're going to sell that run short, and then you're going to fall back to kind of create a wall for the quarterback as he boots back towards the backside of the play with the play action. So you don't want to have big splits because that means you'll have penetration on the backside, which ruins the bootleg, because instead of the quarterback being able to get a clean boot, he's going to have a defensive lineman splitting that A gap between the right guard and the center, or the defensive end splitting the B gap between the guard and the tackle. And now he's able to identify that bootleg way easier. You want to keep those splits kind of tightened down a little bit. So you may have 2.5 foot splits on the front side. You may have 1.5 foot, 1 3/4 splits on the backside. That small difference in splits is all the difference to the success and the structure of the play itself. And a lot of people don't realize those kinds of things. And clearly, they don't realize that kind of thing in Madden either, because it doesn't matter what you call, you have the same splits for everything.
Well, the other thing is, if we're going to take that to another level, the other problem that I have with Madden is no huddle. And line splits dictate a lot of no huddle. Mm-hmm. If you have bigger players now that are running no huddle, that are in control of, like you said, 1.5 foot gap for these plays, that's going to become a lot more apparent. They have to get to the line faster. They have to use more energy as the game, lingers on. So the effectiveness of the line is really connected that based on schemes, which something else that doesn't matter in Madden. No matter how you're going to run, I mean, just obviously the concept of, maybe when you pull linemen, they do line up a little bit differently. But if you go back to a spread set or an air raid set, those splits are the same across the board. Mm-hmm. And when you have players and coaches that are deciding personnel, they're looking at players' weight, especially in no huddles, depending on those splits. And like you said, it's absolutely, it's crazy to me that they talk about, Madden being a football simulator, right? But when you look at splits, they're not a part of the game. Defensive line stunts are, right? How can you have line stunts in the game but not have splits accounted for?
And also with defensive stunts are level, like the fundamental rule with, as an offensive lineman, what my keys are as to identify the potential game. We call them games. I mean, the word, it's called stunts, but offensive linemen call them games. There's a difference in the splits there's a difference in the level of the defensive tackle and defensive end before this ball's ever snapped. There's a difference in the split of between the defensive tackle and the defensive end before the ball's ever snapped. That key that there may be a game coming. Outside of situational statistics that you know about a team and what they do and when they do it, these are the things that give you a heads up that there may be a game. If I was at right guard and I'm looking at my 3 technique, and this is like, for instance, Jarrell Casey. Jarrell Casey in his when I keyed on a lot of his games, his split widened by half a foot, and you could tell his stance squared up to the line, which was another dead tell that he was going to run a game, because his regular pass rush, he had about a 10-degree tilt towards me. I could see his eyes square, I could see squarely both of his eyes based on his alignment. But when he wanted to run a game, I could only see one of his eyes, and he was slightly wider. And that guy doesn't like to line up wide because his go-to move as a pass rusher is a jab swim. He likes to jab to the inside on a quick first step because he's lined up tight on at that 3 technique. He wants that offensive lineman to commit to planting their feet in the ground and punching because they feel like he's going to try and make a move to the inside. And then he widens almost 2 yards in his swim to stretch that O lineman out and make him open up his hips and turnstile so that he gets a clean line drive straight to the quarterback. That was his go-to. I watched him on film, and he murdered guards repeatedly with that move because the guard had to honor the inside jab. What I did, instead of honoring his inside jab, is I just took a quick, we call it a jelly set, where you just quickly shuffle backwards 2 quick steps. I would shuffle back, which would turn his jab into, instead of his jab threatening my inside, it would only square him up to me. So it would allow me to then, after I do my shuffle step, I can now go into a regular kick when he jabs to the outside, and I can widen him almost 2 or 3 yards wider than he wants to be. The first pass rush that I had against him, when he did that allowed me to toss him into his own defensive end, because his own defensive end was trying to run a jab upfield and then come to the inside of the right tackle. But in the games, they're going to be on different levels. Jarrell Casey square to the line. His defensive end was also square to the line. Jarrell Casey takes 1 step up or 1 step into the line, and then allows for his defensive end to penetrate from his left side, where he can then loop around him. So, but their splits are giveaways to that. And the levels that they're on, they want to get the offensive line on 2 different levels. That's what allows games to get into the backfield, is that you have one guy who's closer to the line of scrimmage vertically than you do with your offensive tackle, who may, tackles, it's harder for them because they have to set, because they're going up against the best athlete on the defense, and they have to set deeper sometimes. And when they're stuck in that rhythm of having to always kind of be aware of that, they tend to overset it, and it can get them picked. It can get them rubbed off, and I know that sounds weird, but these are all football terms that we use. It can get them rubbed by the defensive tackle, or it can get the guard actually it can get the guard's hip picked by the defensive end, which then it screws up the entire game. It screws up the entire pass protection, and that's when you see guys going scot-free to the quarterback. But it's something that's easier to show on film than it is to actually talk about, because it does all boil down to alignments. Alignments dictate a lot of what's going to happen during the course of a play.
Yeah, and you can't show that in Madden. I mean, Madden, I don't think has kick steps properly put in the game for defensive end, or for defense, or for offensive linemen to block ends, whether it's going to be an actual pass rush from an end or from a linebacker, or from anything along those lines. I think one of the biggest things that I learned, as far as, if you really want to take a look, if you had an hour and a half to kill and you really want to take a look at something and ask yourself and watching, how does, or would any of this even apply to Madden? Alex Gibbs does a segment when he was with the Falcons called New Developments, where he basically goes through and discusses pretty much the footwork and foundation of most offensive line plays.
Yeah.
And it's so, when you're looking at it, it's number one, it's very overwhelming because it's listen, it's preached to a line of NFL players that have done this their entire life, that understand a lot of the nuances you just went over that most people like myself, we never even have to think about day to day. But those are things that are ingrained in your mind as to not only what you needed to do, but also needed to read to be successful. So what he projects is to someone way outside of a regular person in terms of football intelligence. But when you look at the basics of what he's teaching there and the way you're going to have linemen come out, the way they have to monitor where they're going to be, not only based on what the offense is trying to do, but what the defense is showing. There's a whole lot more to that than just compressing and expanding a line.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much where Madden lets you go. Expand, compress, block one way, block the other way. And that, to me, I think is a big part of the reason. Don't get me wrong. We see linemen come clean all the time in football. But a lot of times in Madden, you see linemen come through clean because the game doesn't know how to
know what to block. It doesn't know how to block them.
Exactly. And people will look at that and they'll say, oh, that is justifying a linebacker coming through a line clean, 2 or 3 times a season, because look, it happens in the real NFL. Well, yeah, it happens in the real NFL too, but for so many more different reasons. That linebacker in Madden is not reading the line splits, is not looking at the way, is not maybe called. And it's funny because, Madden does let you ID the mic, but it doesn't let you have line splits, which kind of go hand in hand.
Exactly.
So, it's interesting that they really miss some key aspects of football if, people were there. It's odd to me that they can bring those things in and still not have a complete simulation game. Because listen, a lot of that is, if line splits mattered, you wouldn't have a defense run all the way down the field on a no huddle and have a quarterback scramble for 20 yards every single time. The defense would be worn out, or the offense would be worn out in 6 plays.
Yeah. And look, and you mentioned you're able to call the mic in Madden, but one thing that I noticed about it is that it doesn't really change anything with the offensive line, because there are situations during a game where a mic linebacker changes mid cadence, right? Well, that means, let's say, for instance, if you're calling the mic linebacker and he's over the center, for regular stock position is a mic linebacker over the center, but then you have a safety drop into the box and those linebackers slide over to let him get into the box. That may change where the mic is. That may change what the mic call is going to be. I know in some instances in Jacksonville, we call it a high or a low, where you actually move the mic linebacker over. So now the Sam becomes the mic and the safety becomes the Sam, or on the other side, the will becomes the mic and the free safety becomes the will. Well, what does that mean to the offensive line? Now it means the entire offensive line is sliding further to that identified linebacker, who is the new mic, which means that the running backs are now changing where they're blocking on the backside of a pass protection. That means that the tight end on the backside left tackle, even the backside guard, they went from maybe being able to provide help and protection to now being soloed up one-on-one, because now your center is going away from you. So you're not going to get help from your center. Your center has got to go away to wherever that linebacker is. And I never really see that in Madden. Madden doesn't take into account that if the mic linebacker changes, that means that the entire assignment setup of the offensive line now changes by one defender. It now moves one defender over. So you're going to have, as a right guard, I'm going to be setting to a new mic that was originally the will. I'll be setting to the right further, which means I'll have help from my center on this 3 technique, who really now becomes more like a shade at the snap because of the adjustment that we have to make to that mic linebacker as the new call. And those are little nuances that the game just does not account for. Therefore, you can see guys running a 4-4 blitz and the same guy still coming free, even though he's the Mike linebacker. The game isn't accounting for him being the Mike linebacker, or at least the line isn't accounting for him, and he's coming scot-free. And that pisses me off more than anything in this game when it allows you to make a new call or to change a call, but the game doesn't necessarily honor the new call the way it's supposed to.
But to that point, let's say the defense came out in a 4-3 and you ID the Mike incorrectly intentionally. You put it as the Sam, you put it as the Will. The defense should break your offense almost immediately because you've pretty much told the entire core of your offense
to block the wrong person.
To block the wrong people. Right. So it should look as confusing as possible because they don't know where they're going. When you do that in Madden, that doesn't actually happen. They still almost kind of default back to play art and everything kind of gets caught up in the wash. Mm-hmm. It would be the equivalent of putting a car in reverse and then trying to go forward and not wondering why.
And then wondering why you just backed through your garage.
Right. Why'd you back into the garage? Yeah, exactly. Because you were telling the car to do something completely different than it was actually what you wanted it to do. And that was one of the really funny things. And it's so amazing when you go back and they talk about the invent of bringing that into the game and how it was going to be this massive game-changing tool, which it should be. But you never hear about it anymore. It's been in the game for like 3 or 4 years. I think 3 years now.
Yeah,
it hasn't taken off.
And that should have been the factor in Madden that separated the truly good and skilled Madden players, people who know football, from the guys who take advantage of broken aspects of the game. That for me has always been, that should have killed freelance. Because if you're going to try and freelance on defense, well, I know how to adjust my offense to the point where it compensates for your freelancing and exploits it behind you, where you're not able to freelance against it. You have to play and that's what I always loved about 2K football. That's what I always loved about 2K football is that if you tried to freelance, you would pay for it. You would pay dearly. Anybody who was good would exploit you because when you try, the game from a mechanic standpoint just will not allow you to freelance. Your players doesn't have the stamina to do that, to run around the entire secondary and cover each and every route. It's just not going to happen. Secondly, anybody who's good and I always felt like the hot route and the safe or in the secondary audible system in 2K was far better because it allowed you to kind of shift the strength of your defense and shift the routes of your offense to find gaps in the defenses. And man, I was such a beast at 2K. I never played Madden. I never played Madden when 2K came out until after All Pro Football 2K8 because there was no more 2K football, obviously, to play. But only then did I start picking up Madden. And instantly, I would just watch, I would play games and I would dominate the vast majority of people who were moderate to good because I just knew how to attack them better. They didn't realize that they didn't necessarily realize that I knew what coverages they were in and I knew what routes beat those coverages. The only thing that really kind of stumps me with playing Madden is when you play against certain level of players who have certain level of teams as far as their ratings go, especially on MUT, it doesn't matter. It does not matter that you're better than them at football. It doesn't matter that you know more than them at football. The simple fact that their players are rated so high, which another thing that bothers me about Madden so badly is that why is it that if I have a team where my highest rated players are 91, 92, 93, why is it that the other guy's team whose players are rated 95, 96, 97, why are they literally moving at two different speeds? I mean, the speed differential as a team is completely unbalanced. They got guys who can break off of a route and go and make a play on another route that's 10 yards away from them in a heartbeat. And it looks like they're taking one step every 5 yards. It's like, what? That doesn't make any sense. He's covering the post route. How can he come and make the play on the comeback route? Doesn't make any sense. That's why Madden to me is just it might as well be a slightly more sophisticated NFL blitz, because at the end of the day, you get to a point where the players are so unbalanced in how the game allows you to play in MUT. And I'm speaking, because MUT is where the majority of people play the game now. They don't really play the conventional online modes when you go on and play. They're playing MUT, and everybody's racing to get to their 98, 99 rated players. I'm not spending my money to get no damn 90, 98, 99 player. I just try and finagle the system, get as many coins as I can, and buy players with my coins, or get players through the challenges. But you see, they intentionally make those challenges, grind fests, so that you feel like you need to just take the shortcut and go buy it. But I ain't doing it. I'm not going to do it.
They make it so boring that it almost becomes monotonous, like it's a job to go get a decent player. And the funny thing is, there's a self-reliance to the system where the players that came out, the most feared players in October, and how great they were and rated and received, their value goes down so much in January, February, as new, programs roll out. It's number one, it's the oversaturation of the market, but you can also see it's the mentality of players that have to continually buy things new to get a new, or feel like they're going to get a new experience to help engage them in the game. I want the playoff Russell Wilson, even though I've got the most feared Russell Wilson, even though I had the NFL starter pack Russell Wilson, however you want to go against that. You're basically selling someone the facade of something new to re-engage them with the game. Whereas in the history of video games, most decent games really didn't need to do that. Your first person shooters, your Grand Theft Autos, sure, they brought things that added to the game later on, but they weren't repackaging it every single month, where you felt this need to keep the game fresh by purchasing new player cards or revitalizing what you had. And I think that really, in two ways, number one, it shows maybe the realism of what have you done for me lately in the NFL, but secondarily, players are constantly trying to find ways to breathe new life into this game because they're bored with it. This, to me, Madden 20 has been the most boring Madden, the most stale, repetitive, tired. The more they try to do, player, superstar, and
all these bells and whistles that make no difference to the game itself.
Right. The more they do that, the more I play the game and realize, hey, there's no intrinsic value here. There's no dynamic change.
No.
It just pushes me further and further away, because you get to the point where you say, hey, if this didn't make it right, if this didn't make it better, what will?
So tell me, what do you know about the whole licensing issue? Because at the end, because this is, to me, is where I feel if we could get 2K Sports to have hell, if they got a 1-year license on the NFL, I think it would change the entire landscape of NFL football gaming, because we all know 2K likely just has that they likely have that 2K engine, football engine, just sitting back there. That all it would need is give them let's speak hypothetically. Give them a 12-month cycle to update that 2K engine and bring it into the recent generation, or maybe even the next generation console gaming. People would only need to see that one time to know what the better game is. With real, actual licensed football, it would be an easy win, I feel, for 2K over EA, with 1 year to show what they have with their 2K engine versus what Madden has with the Frostbite engine. I don't even think it would even be competition. And why isn't the NFL allowing for competition with that license in the same way that the sport is dictated by competition?
Yeah, it's interesting to a degree. If you look at, number one, the variable of 2K is a company, right? We can all have our emotional attachment to 2K football, but at the end of the day, they have to do what's best for them from a business standpoint. And I don't think them investing a ton of money, time, resource, energy to bring the multitude of engines 2K5 or 2K8 ran on up to a new console is going to behoove them in terms of making a product. They've already came out and said they lost money with 2K8. They didn't really position 2K to be successful the way that they could have. And short of having a license, they're not interested in re-engaging with a football game, which makes perfect sense from a company standpoint. Like, they have to make money. But to that point, what we've seen from the NFL is the propensity to push away from exclusivity agreements. Sure, Nike is the supplier of the jerseys. Reebok was before, I'm sure. As you know, you've got a whole closet full of them. But at the same time, we've seen Under Armour, Adidas, Cutters, so many different glove and cleat manufacturers come in. They haven't just taken that step in football games to let someone else go into the marketplace. I think ultimately what's going to have to happen, and what will happen more than likely, is the NFL is good at one thing: overvaluing itself. They are going to price themselves out of the market with EA, because EA literally has to go back to them just about every year and renegotiate this contract, because you got to remember, when they signed this thing, EA probably had a misinterpretation of how Madden was going to grow and sell. Certainly didn't think that gamers were going to grow frustrated and turn from the franchise. If you look at the evolution of Madden, it's certainly dipped. When you look at the way, game ratings have been from a player standpoint, most places, and I know there's a huge argument, oh, that's because digital sales. No, listen, Madden used to be an experience for gamers, okay? Midnight releases weren't just about, I'm going to get the game at midnight. It was, I'm going out with my friends. I'm going to be there with like-minded gamers. We're going to
play this game all night long.
Exactly.
And that was, even, and I don't mean to cut you off, but even to speak a little bit more to that, when it was a 2K, NFL 2K and Madden, you had two fandoms that competed against each other and said, my game is better than yours. And that drove the developers to continue to innovate both games to the extent where we were getting games that were, at the time, nearly perfect football games. Because these teams, NFL, 2K Sports, they innovated from a statistical standpoint. They innovated from their developmental side. They innovated the actual engine. They innovated it to a point where the game played based on the stats that presented themselves based on everything that happened in your games during the season. Your teams played consistent to the way the stats said they played. Your teams evolved based on how you played, and they would adjust and play based on how you played. The defense would adjust and defend you based on how you play. It wasn't just a static running random plays, having random formations, and running against each other. And that's where it was leaving Madden in the dust and becoming a better, more fully rounded game. And some say that it was to the detriment of the genre that 2K lowered their price to $20, but that was the ultimate business move to put them in to expose the entire gaming community, football gaming community, to their product for 1 year, to show that we have a product that can't be competed with. We could sell it at $50 and sell just as many units, but we're going to sell it at $20 because we want everybody to see it, even the people on the other side who think their game is better than ours. Well, you can afford $20 to pay for a game that's easily worth $50. And the NFL took that as some kind of slight towards the brand, when it really was only the 2K showing that they are the kind of developer that is willing to take a risk to prove that their product is the better product. And
They had confidence in their game. We'll sell this to you for $20 and we'll know you never go back to Madden. It's interesting you brought up the VIP there and the way 2K tracked. What I'll offer is some of my best memories with Madden aren't playing the game. They're not playing Madden Ultimate Team. They're not opening a pack. They're not grinding for a card. It was, social experiences you had with your friends, coworkers, family members. I remember a perfect dialogue between these two games. I had a friend of mine that I worked with back, in the late 90s. And he had Madden, he had 2K, and 2K had the VIP system that recorded basically everything you did as a user and implemented that into a game plan that he could use and then ultimately play against me when I wasn't there. So I would generally beat this guy, not by a whole lot, but he used my VIP
and he started gaining on you.
Started a game plan against what I did, and ultimately got to a position where we had close competitive games. Now with Madden, same exact time. In Madden, all we could do is take our rosters on our $40 PS1 memory cards, and drag them over to each other's houses, plug in and play, and it was the same experience from we're playing the game. But it was a far different experience of what you could do beyond that. And when you talk about, game planning, revitalizing a game, having fun with a game, getting a different experience, when you can literally go and say, okay, I want to play against this person, even though they're not here, by using their VIP, the game knows percentage-wise, which is all football is, percentage-wise, what is a team going to do in this situation? 3rd and 5, 2nd and 5, 3rd and long distance, this point of the game, this quarter. A lot of fans I don't even think can relate to that. Imagine if EA took all the data that you had from playing this year and they used that to create kind of a concept of how you played.
Like
and what
a ghost, like a ghost version of your team. Like how
right.
Doing
and what I had to do to end up beating him, I'll never forget this, was I had to end up loading my own VIP against myself.
Play against yourself.
Play against my team and try to figure out, okay, what am I doing that's so not exploitable, but what am I doing that's so beatable? And then try to game plan against my own defense to make myself better. And that's exactly what happened.
I played the game.
I did. I learned to make myself better. I learned that the plays that I thought I was running, the blitzes, the shells, I thought I was doing the right thing, but what I was doing was inevitably putting myself in vulnerable positions to other side of the game, whether I was giving up big runs for tosses and pitches, or I was putting myself in bad positions for play actions because I kept blitzing. But I learned by playing myself, hey, there's different ways to do this, and I ultimately made myself better play. That is not even possible in Madden today. It's not even possible
today in 2020. You can't even replicate the VIP system that 2K innovated the entire football gaming landscape with, and that's because they're lazy. That's because EA Sports is lazy. They're resting on the name and reputation and the monetization features of Madden, and I'm not going for it. I'm not going to buy a single thing that puts the price of that game over at tops $80 for me. Can you believe that there's people who spend thousands of dollars on a game that costs $59.99? I mean, what?
I can to a point of if it's an investment. Listen, if you've got a YouTube channel, right, which naturally you do, and hey, the vicious cycle that a lot of people don't talk with Madden is the pack openings. So let's think about it this way from a business standpoint. Let's remove ourselves from gamers. You and I have YouTube channels. I'm going to invest $500 into my channel, which I know I'll make back in the month. You'll make back in the month. It's an investment in the channel. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to sit here, I'm going to open packs. Okay. And then you've got, I say this in the copper world, you've got kids. Okay. They don't have $500 to buy these packs, but they want to see it. They want to see what does $500 in Madden look like? What type of cards would I get if I mowed yards for 2 months, nonstop straight, collected that $200 and threw it all down in Madden? They want to see that. They want to live vicariously through that individual, that they can't spend that type of money on this game. So I see why certain people want to do that. Then, of course, you have people watching that say, "Oh man, he got that card he wanted. He got that legend card that I need. That John Henderson card that I want."
Mm-hmm.
Whatever the case is, he got that Maurice Jones-Drew card. He got that Uche Nwaneri card I needed. That Cowboy card, the rare one. So they see that, and then of course, it just goes back to being kids, right? We're flipping through the magazine for Sears, the wish book. We're circling what we want. Now we see somebody else get it. When now he got it, I want it. Now I'm going to go buy the packs. That to me is the vicious cycle. But you have to, from our standpoint, a lot of things we talked about today, football doesn't matter, but it's not about football. It's about the person wanting that player. They don't care. They at this point, I've succumbed to the fact they know that Mike Vick doesn't play like Mike Vick, and the game can't actually handle Ed Reed playing like Ed Reed.
Yeah.
But if I have that player's card, then I'll feel better because I have this accomplishment. And that's what it comes down to. So I can see where the investment comes from just by today's mindset of, everybody wants everything. You got to collect them all, whatever the case may be. I can see where it comes from. The challenge I have with it more is you're collecting things that have no real
intrinsic value. Like you can't even convert those players. Maybe if you took a 10% hit on the stats of the player and they allowed you to transfer it into the next year's game, then it'd be okay.
They did that one year. If you remember, about 2 years ago, they actually allowed you to carry. It was a promotion they did, because I was always shocked that they didn't do it again. They had 5 or 6 players at the end of the year where they gave you you had, sure, they were like 95s, 94s, 96s. Somebody will know this, and then you could actually turn them in your profile, and then when you open the new Madden, sure, they weren't their 90s, they were in the 80s, because God knows they've got to give you a reason to grind. You still carried those players over, and it's funny when you think about it that way. Anybody that bought any player for Madden 17 or 18, they are beyond worthless now. It's literally the most unsellable commodity you can buy. It is a MUT pack. It has no value. I did a video years ago. Where I think I used to collect the McFarlane figures, and they were doing the Madden Ultimate Team McFarlanes, and they gave you like a $10 pack if you bought the $30 figure. I was buying $30 figure anyway. It didn't matter to me. So I said, if I bought this $10 pack, what would the value of these cards be? And it worked out. If you equate, coins to dollars to resale value to players, the $10 in U.S. currency related to like 37 cents in Maddenville.
Oh, 70% hit.
More than that. That's like a 99.9% hit. It was absolutely incredible. And the other side of it is, if we really want to get down to brass tacks, we talk about, maybe a parent that purchases these packets for their kids. Do you think that the parent has any earthly concept when the kid comes back and says, I'm not happy with this card, with that $10 purchase, Dad? I got 3 silvers, a bronze, and a gold, and I thought I was going to get a red one, or I thought I was going to get a legend one. Do you think the parents care, or do you think they just say, okay, shut up and eat your meatloaf? It's dinner.
Yeah. The parents, they have no idea the kind of scam that's being run on their kid when it comes to buying these packs. And that's why I've always equated it to gambling. And I don't see why they haven't been able to. Well, I know why. I've watched videos talking about this ESRB situation and how they're handling all this loot box, all these quote unquote surprise mechanics that they claim is not gambling in games. But what else would you be? You're not buying a Madden pack for 90% of the players in the pack. You're looking for one card, and they're going to give you 5 or 6 cards that are useless, that are just going towards training points. And then you might get one card that is a player that you can use. And then if you buy multiples, you're going to continue to get that same player in the multiples instead of getting another player that's useful. And that's what happened to me in Madden 19. And that's when I was like, you know what? No, there's no way I'm spending another $1 on this. No way. I don't give a damn how much money I got. I'm not going to blow money to continue to get the same ridiculous cards when I need a safety. Why do I keep getting a tailback that's an 85 or an 88. I've got a 92 tailback. Why do they keep giving me tailbacks? I'm going to have to spend $100 to get the safety that I need. Well, then why am I even playing this game? I just spent twice the amount on one player on one card than I did on the entire game. I'm not going to do it. That's insanity. And that is what they bank on in order to get people to continue to shovel money into their products. Madden or EA Sports rather, or EA rather, from FIFA alone made almost $1 billion on FUT, on FUT, on their FIFA Ultimate Team. Almost $1 billion. And from that point on, the entire business model of EA Sports has changed to support monetization. They don't even care. I mean, like you pointed out in some of your videos, there's still signage from last year's Madden game in Madden 20.
Whoops.
How the hell is that even acceptable? I would sue them and say false advertisement.
There's no Madden practice mode. That's why. There's no MUT practice mode. If that practice mode was in MUT, they would have caught that right away. If they sold you a practice field to play on in MUT,
that means they're not even looking. That means they're not even looking at their code.
That's one of the things that always really struck me about MUT. Why can't you take that into a practice scenario? Why can't you take that team and play with it openly outside of Ultimate Team? You can only really play in the designed online games or through the challenges. And a big part of me has thought if you actually could take those players, and people have done this, and actually put them on the field and see the true difference between your 82 John Randall and your 98 John Randall, you would say there is no way I'm paying for that card. Because people will go through and they'll take the attributes from Madden Ultimate Team and they'll put them into a creative player and he'll be an 88 overall. Yeah. But somehow in Ultimate Team, he's a 99 overall because there's so much more on the back end of, whatever they do behind the player's attributes that make him better. But it's always been ironic to me that you're essentially paying for these players, but you don't get to use them in every facet of the game. Why couldn't I take my Madden Ultimate Team? I mean, if that's truly what it is, the Ultimate Team, and really port that into a
franchise mode.
Exactly, a franchise mode, a season mode. Why is that something that's not possible? I mean, it seems like it would open the door to so much more revenue, right? Because now I've got a real need. I want to play a full season with the Redskins and have Sean Taylor back again. I want to play a full season with the Colts with Johnny Unitas if he was a player card. Now you open that up to two whole different levels of the game.
Whole completely different levels of coding,
right?
That aren't even compatible with one another.
Yeah, and they don't do it. Now you would actually take what most people, at least in the simulation community, despise in Madden Ultimate Team and give us a reason to enjoy it to a point because hey, I'm getting Reggie Wayne back on the Colts as a 98 overall.
Mm-hmm.
They don't do it. Why? Because I think we would learn very quickly once those players get out of MUT and get into regular world Madden, their value is not what you think it is. A lot of it is kind of placebo, Yeah. I bought this $15 Reggie Wayne. He's going to play like $15 Reggie Wayne, even if he's only, 15-cent Reggie Wayne.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of great stuff, man. And look, everybody who has joined the podcast, we've extended it a pretty fair bit in my usual length, but we're having fun with it. Ryan Moody here, he is the authority on all things Madden breakdowns. I've been watching his videos for years on YouTube, and mainly because I was looking for somebody who could relate to the frustrations that I was having dealing with Madden, going back to Madden 15, 16, 17. And, I found his channel and I subscribe to it. I get notified whenever he drops new videos. I watch them on a regular basis. I've seen a lot of your different iterations of your introductions, and I like the latest one you did with a little bit more more hip hop style music you got going on in there. It was dope. Yeah, it's been a great time having you on the channel, man, having you on the podcast. I think we got to bring this thing to an end here now. But just once again, let the people know where you are, where they can find you, and we'll go from there. We'll finish up from there.
Yeah, we tried to do this an hour ago, but we'll get it done this time. So youtube.com/Ryan Moody. You can follow me over on Twitter @ShutdownSafety, and I'm sure me and Uche will be back to discuss Madden at some point in the future, whether my channel or his. This won't be the last time.
Absolutely. I appreciate you being on the channel, man. For everybody out there, I appreciate you coming on to the Lineman Life podcast. Again, remember this podcast is on Tuesdays and Thursdays, 12:30 p.m. Eastern time. Do me a favor and go and hit that subscribe button on my channel. Hit the like button for this video. We got to defeat that YouTube algorithm, and it is a son of a gun. It's doing whatever it can to keep us independent channels suppressed as much as possible. But we're going to keep doing our thing here, and I'm going to keep doing my thing for you guys as your observant lineman. Appreciate you all. We will catch you all on the next podcast. Peace.